Jack Thursby reads Street Fighter, a novel by Todd Strasser based on the screenplay by Stephen E. D'Souza. For Jeff, with all my love. Just to clarify, that is not me dedicating this audiobook to Jeff. I don't even know a Jeff. I'm assuming this is Todd Strasser dedicating it to Jeff with all his love. Chapter 1. Deep in the misty jungles of the Shadaloo Delta, an ancient stone temple stood hidden among the tropical trees and vines. Snakes slithered through the loose moss-covered stones that had once been monuments to long-forgotten deities. Screeching monkeys scampered playfully up the crumbling stone steps, and small Asian deer grazed quietly amongst the fallen rocks that had once been the temple's stone walls. It was a place that appeared to be empty and deserted, but it was not what it seemed. For months, the small Asian country of Shadaloo had been engulfed in a vicious civil war between the government and the forces of the maniacal warlord who called himself General M. Bison. Fueled by almost limitless funds from drug running, extortion and gambling, the renegade general had waged war with sophisticated weapons purchased from Libya, Iraq, and any other nation willing to sell. But Bison was no petty crook. He had no intention of stopping until he ruled not only Shadaloo, but also all of Southeast Asia, and from there, the world. Hidden deep underneath the ancient temple was an ultra-modern fortress. There Bison sat at his desk, a thick slab of video monitors, consoles, and other electronic wizardry that floated on a platform in mid-air. Looking like a small convertible flying saucer, the desk hovered about the Bison command center with the help of superconductivity. Bison was a large man with slicked back black hair and round, fiendish eyes of a venomous snake. He wore a high-peaked green military cap with a silver insignia of a winged skull pinned to it. This morbid image was Bison's logo, and was on everything he touched, from uniforms of his soldiers to the curtains of his private quarters. A long, grey-coloured cape was held in place by a similarly shaped clasp. Beneath the cape was a red bodysuit of woven body armour that not only protected him, but also contained a state-of-the-art life support system. His hands were encased in red gloves of the same material. Before him spread his vast high-tech electronic headquarters, shaped much like a NASA command center. Below were rows of computerized battle consoles, their screens bright with graphs, war maps, and scenes of actual fighting in other parts of Shadaloo. Dozens of technicians monitored the consoles, while on crisscrossing catwalks above, Bison troopers were wearing red helmets and chrome face guards patrolled. Dominating the entire room was a bank of video monitors on the wall above the console, and across from Bison's desk. On these monitors, Bison watched comfortably as his war raged on. At that moment, Bison was paying no attention to the scenes of mayhem and destruction that played on the monitors like 24 different horror movies. Instead, his attention was turned to a dark-haired man with intelligent eyes, who was wearing the white coat of a scientist. The man's hands and feet were bound in shackles, and a heavy steel ring hung around his neck. A fearsome guard, armed with an automatic rifle, stood behind him. "So, Mr. Dallism, what progress have you made?" Bison asked, pretending to wear a benignant smile. "Some," the older man replied, making no attempt to hide the scorn in his voice. "Only some?" Bison's eyebrows rose, and his eyes narrowed. "I expect your genetic mutation device to be working by tonight." "But that isn't enough time," Dallism said. "I say it is," Bison replied, his face darkening. "If it isn't, I will make sure that you die a slow and exquisitely painful death." Dallism nodded. Ever since he was kidnapped by Bison's men in Stockholm and brought to this madhouse, he had endured such threats. The problem was they weren't idle. He had seen Bison have men killed for far less. The familiar global news television jingle floated across the room from the bank of video monitors. Bison quickly spun around in his seat to watch the videos of his very own tanks were shown rumbling across scorched, war-torn fields, and the words "Crisis in Shadaloo" flashed on the screen. Immediately forgetting the recalcitrant Dr. Dallism, Bison smiled, delighted that once again he was dominating the world news. He was even more delighted that the video cut to his favorite GNT reporter, the young, attractive, and curvaceous Chun-li Zan. Bison quickly pressed the TV remote, and the pretty black-haired reporter filled every screen on the wall. She was wearing an olive-coloured photographer's vest over a white blouse and light tan slacks. The bangs of her straight black hair stopped just above her eyes. "Allied nation forces are consolidating their hold on Shadaloo City today," Chun-li reported, holding a microphone and gesturing to lines of soldiers marching past her, wearing the robin's egg blue berets and grey-blue camouflage uniforms that earmarked an AN forces. "This concludes the night of skirmishing that secured the Southeast Asian port. But these soldiers aren't celebrating just yet. They know that defeating the ragtag militia is one thing, but defeating the heavily armed forces of General M. Bison is quite another. Bison smiled to himself. Truer words had rarely been spoken. It's only been 24 hours since the dangerously unpredictable warlord seized 63 unarmed Allied nations relief workers from a village north of here, Chun-li continued. The self-styled general's ransom demand is an astounding $20 billion. Meanwhile, at this time, the location of the 63 hostages remains unknown. To you, my dear, Bison thought with a smile, gazing down at the massive steel door in the center of the command room. Beneath that door, on the wall below, the hostages huddled in the dark in a pit-like metal dungeon. The AN forces know that in Bison they are facing a power-mad dictator, the young reporter continued. A dictator whose drug money has equipped his army with high-tech weaponry that some intelligent experts fear is equal to anything in the industrialized world. Bison shook his head. Here she was wrong. Not equal to, but far beyond anything in the industrialized world, thanks to his friend Mr. Darlism. Of the 15 Allied nation troops assigned to protect the missing relief workers, 12 are confirmed dead and 3 are missing, Chun-li added. Bison glanced to his right, where 3 AN soldiers now stood with their hoods covered in their heads and their hands tied behind their backs. They were surrounded by 4 heavily armed guards, carrying black automatic rifles with shiny bayonets. The guards wore trademark red uniforms of the armies of Bison. Their heads were covered in deep red helmets, and their faces were obscured by shiny chrome face masks. The sight and sound of his favorite reporter talking about his latest conquest filled the rebel leader with lust for violence. He stood up. Immediately his personal bodyguard, a giant of a man named Zangief, stepped out of the shadows. The bodyguard had a thick black beard. His hair had been shaved into a mohawk, and he had barely finished 3rd grade, and his education consisted of one idea. Bison was his god. "Remove my cape," Bison ordered. "Yes, sir." Zangief immediately drew the cape back from the master's shoulders. Bison stretched his arms and pulled his hands into fists. A yearning for violence flooded through his veins. It was time. He needed to find the right specimen for his greatest experiment ever, the specimen who, when treated by Dr. Darlism, would become the greatest killer who ever walked the earth. Bison nodded at the guards and gestured to one of the AM soldiers. "Untie him." The guards untied the soldier's hands and pulled the black hood off his head. The soldier looked around and blinked, clearly disorientated. "You came across the world to fight me, soldier," Bison said, clenching and unclenching his fists. "Now, finally, you have your chance." The soldier focused on him and felt a prickly nudge of the bayonet behind him. Realizing he was facing the rebel leader himself, the man lunged forward. His attack was so feeble that Bison almost smiled. He quickly sidestepped the man, tripped him, and drove an elbow into his kidney. Splat! The man crashed to the floor, writhing in a moment of agony before losing consciousness. "Pathetic," Bison muttered. The experience had done nothing to satisfy his urge for violence or his need for an appropriate guinea pig. He turned to the next man. "Your turn." This AN soldier launched himself in the air, throwing a jabbing kick at Bison's face. It was an improvement, but just barely. Bison easily blocked the kick and upended the man with a kick of his own. Thunk! The man's head smacked to the floor. Bison heard the sickening sound of bones cracking and smiled. The man fell into an unconscious heap. Bison shook his head in disgust. It might be harder to find his warrior than he thought. Rather than fight the remaining AN soldier, he turned to the bank of video monitors. Still on air, Chun-li was gesturing towards an armored vehicle pulling up behind her. A tall, powerfully built AN colonel hopped out of the vehicle and started walking towards her, wearing a light blue beret and camouflage uniform. He had short blonde hair and a chiseled, handsome face with penetrating blue eyes and a firm, hard jaw. "I think I see the AN commander coming this way," Chun-li said, moving quickly towards him. "I'll try and get a few words with him." The pretty young reporter stuck her microphone in his face. The colonel continued to walk. "Colonel Gall," she said, "may we talk to you?" "No." Bison watched on the screen as Gall continued past the reporter, so unlike his normal publicity-hungry types who craved the world's audience. He was followed by a pretty young British woman whose pigtails were pinned under her AM beret. There was a faded combat scar on her cheek. Her name was Cammy. She and a tall Native American soldier named T-Hawk were Colonel Gall's aides. T-Hawk walked beside Cammy, his head wrapped in gauze from a recent wound. While Chun-li scurried after Gall on the monitor, Bison turned to the sole remaining AN prisoner, the captain. As the hood was pulled from his head, the officer blinked and focused more quickly than his companions had. He was a strikingly built Brazilian man with short black hair and athletic build. His name was Carlos Blanca. Sensing instantly what he was up against, Blanca struck a fighting stance. A dozen feet away, Bison smiled, with a perverse pleasure, and got to a stance of his own. It was clear that this AN soldier knew how to fight. "Finally," he said, "a workout." The Bison guards backed away as the two men circled each other, neither falling for each other's feints. Meanwhile, the broadcast continued to blare on the opposite wall of the command post. "Colonel," Chun-li said with a gasp, catching up to Guile, "don't you want to speak to the world audience?" Colonel Guile stopped and glared at her, seemingly unaware that he was being captured live for the worldwide audiences. "Why, the world chickened out of Bosnia and Rwanda? I wouldn't want to talk to them on a bet." The commander started to turn away, but then stopped and turned back to the camera. "But I do want to speak to someone, that wannabe dictator called General Bison." In the command post, Bison was so surprised to hear himself addressed by Guile he turned to look at the screen. Seeing an opportunity, Carlos Blanca swung hard. Wham! He caught Bison in the jaw, knocking the creep backwards. Holding his jaw with one hand, Bison pointed to the soldiers and screamed at his men, "Hold him!" But then he turned back to the screen. On the television, Colonel Guile grabbed the mic out of Chun-Li's hand and glared into the camera. "I know you like to see yourself on television, you twisted clown, so look at this!" And Guile made a well-known gesture with his hand. Bison felt himself fill with rage. He spun around and yelled at the dark-skinned man bent over a complicated-looking electronics console. "DJ, break in, now!" DJ was an expert electronics technician, and his fingers raced over the electronic control board like a concert pianist typing out instructions. "Satellite in range," he called out. "We're riding the beam." High above them, atop the temple ruins, a sophisticated satellite dish suddenly rose through the rocks, scaring off the monkeys and birds. As the dish tilted skyward, a high-pitched whine burst from it. Down below in the command center, Bison turned to Blanca and narrowed his eyes. He stepped towards him and reached towards the soldier's neck. Blanca moved to defend himself, but half a dozen of Bison's men poked their bayonets menacingly at him. Blanca put his hands down. Bison didn't grab the man's throat. Instead, he reached into his shirt and pulled out his dog tags. "Carlos Blanca," he read. Bison touched his sore jaw. "No one has drawn blood from me in many years, Carlos Blanca." Bison turned to his men. Here was a subject worthy of his plans. "Take him to the laboratory." As the men led Blanca away, Zangief sidled up to the boss. "Dr. Darlism's laboratory?" Bison nodded slowly. "Yes, I think Captain Blanca will make a very interesting specimen." Chapter 2. Many miles away at the Allied Nations compound in Shadaloo City, Chun-Li Zhang yanked her microphone back from Colonel Guile. Next time she vowed to herself she would wear a wireless mic that wouldn't be so easy to grab. She turned once again to face the camera crew. Her cameraman, a powerfully built African-American named Bolrog, focused the camera in on her. Bolrog wore a green vest over a tight purple t-shirt. A gold earring glinted in his ear. The sun was starting to set, and the cameraman flicked on a small spotlight. "Thank you, Colonel Guile," Chun-Li began, but she was abruptly cut short by the surprise announcement through her earphone from the tech person inside the GNT van. Quickly regaining her composure, the young reporter addressed the world audience. I've just been informed that GNT has received a transmission from General Bison himself. We'll now go live to the rebel warlord." A few feet away, Guile smiled and turned to look at the small portable TV monitor Miss Zhang took her cues from. On the screen, Chun-Li dissolved into static and was then replaced by the image of a renegade general himself. This was what Guile hoped would happen. Guile quickly turned to Cammy. "He took the bait. Trace that signal. Stat." "But electronic warfare hasn't offloaded," Cammy replied in a British accent. Guile quickly looked at the AN compound, a group of buildings surrounded by a tall stone wall topped with barbed wire. "Then commandeer something," Guile barked. "Anything, just move. We've got to get a read on that signal and trace it." The only possibility was the blue and silver GNT news van parked in the courtyard next to the AN headquarters building. Cammy dashed towards it, with T-Hawk right behind. She yanked the door open and froze. Inside the van was the largest man she'd ever seen. His name was Edmund Honda, and Cammy guessed correctly that he must have been a sumo wrestler. Of course, the brightly coloured Hawaiian shirt was sort of a giveaway, as was the huge submarine sandwich he was in the process of devouring when he was working at the switchboard. His black hair was short, except for a long black ponytail that hung down his back. "Move aside," Cammy ordered. Honda looked at her like she was crazy. "I am inside." Cammy saw his point. With Honda inside, there was barely any room for anyone else. "Well, inhale," Cammy yelled, and climbed in the van, followed by T-Hawk. "What are you doing?" Honda asked. "Taking over," T-Hawk informed, and started to flick switches on the electronic video console. Meanwhile, outside on the tiny monitor, Bison had begun to address the commander of the AN forces. "Colonel Guile, Why do you address a fellow warrior with such disrespect? Guile laughed. Warrior? You? I've known tapeworms with more honor than you'll ever see. How many doctors and nurses have you killed this week, Bison? How many children have you orphaned? How many villages destroyed? Inside the G&T van, Cammy and T-Hawk were having problems tracking Bison's signal. Cammy leaned out of the van and motioned to Guile to stretch things out and keep Bison talking as long as possible. On the monitor, Bison glowered at him. You will choke on those words, Guile. Any time, bozo, Guile taunted the man, hoping to keep him ranting and raving long enough for Cammy and T-Hawk to get a fix on his secret command post. We'll go worldwide, just like now. The profits from the pay-per-view can go to the families of your victims. On the screen, General Bison was momentarily distracted by the whispering warnings from DJ. He turned back to the monitors. So, you're tracing this. You think you're clever, Guile? Well, think about this. You have 3 days. If my $20 billion is not delivered by then, the hostages will die and the world will hold you responsible. In the background, Bison's men began to chant their leader's name. Sensing they were about to cut off, Guile spoke quickly. You hostages, if you can hear me, we're coming. Charlie, hang on, buddy. We're on our way. The monitor screen went to static. Guile felt his spirits fall. His closest friend, Carlos Charlie Blanca, had been assigned to lead the detail of AN soldiers whose job it was to protect the civilian relief workers. When the relief workers were kidnapped, Charlie must have been taken into that sadist's hands. The door of the G&T van swung open and Cammy and T-Hawk climbed out with dour expressions on their faces. Cammy gave the colonel the bad news. We couldn't trace the signal. Bison broke off too soon. Guile shook his head angrily and stared at Chun-li. For a minute, you were almost useful. He turned and strode towards the AN headquarters. Chun-li couldn't believe how unfriendly he'd been. She looked over at Cammy. He doesn't like women, does he? She asked. Oh no, Mom, Cammy answered with all sincerity. He likes women just fine. It's reporters he doesn't like. I assure you, it's an equal opportunity dislike. Cammy turned and jogged to catch up with Guile. Chun-li followed her. The sun continued to fall and it was almost dark now. Chun-li had places to go, but not before she let the commander of the AN forces know that he wasn't going to get off easily. She ran ahead and stood in front of him, blocking his path. Colonel Guile, she said, trying to keep her anger from spilling out her words. What makes you think you can behave like this? I have my own army, Guile replied. I can behave any way I want. And you like it, don't you? Chun-li's words reeked of sarcasm. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Guile knew how to dish it right back. Chun-li glared at him. You better get used to me, Colonel. I'm going to be here until the war is over. That's possibly a good reason to get it over as soon as possible, Guile replied, and turned to Cammy. Lieutenant, make a note. End war as quickly as possible. Yes, sir, Cammy saluted with a slight smile. Chun-li was fuming. She was getting tired of this man, who was nearly full of himself as that madman Bison. You may find yourself amusing, Colonel, but I don't. The whole world is watching the events here in Shadaloo, and you have an obligation to... My only obligation is to take this dictator Bison down so fast and so hard that the next dictator decides to get in a safer line of work. Guile shot back, cutting her short. I don't have time to give interviews, sound bites, or the time of day. Colonel Guile looked down at his watch. And speaking of time of day, this city is under curfew. You better get moving, miss. Press passes are invalid after dark. You can't do that, Chun-li said with a gasp. No? Guile gave her a big smile and nodded towards the G&T van. Chun-li turned and felt her jaw drop. The van was being towed by a military vehicle. Her cameraman Bulwark and tech person Honda were running as fast as they could across the courtyard, chasing after it. Hey! Chun-li cried, dashing after them. Wait! Guile and his aides watched as they chased the van into the darkness. Guile shook his head and sighed. The press. Can't live with them? You can't put them in front of a firing squad. The others chuckled. Guile knew it was important to keep the facade and morale up. But the truth was he was worried. He had fewer than 72 hours to find Bison's secret fortress and command post and save those hostages. And he didn't doubt that if he was 1 minute late, Bison would have every last one of them slaughtered. Chapter 3. The waterfront of the port of Shadaloo was a dark, sinister place filled with dilapidated boats, flimsy piers, and stagnant water. Lining the shores were various warehouses and shacks where the affairs of the underworld were commonly transacted. During the day it was bustled with legitimate activity, but at night it was a no-man's land visited only by the most heavily armed and dangerous characters. In the shadows under a dock, in a small rowboat borrowed for the occasion, Ken Masters and Ryu Hoshi huddled and waited. Ken, an American with light brown hair, wore a brown vest and green tie over a blue denim shirt. Ryu, a handsome young Asian man with black hair and dark eyes, wore a white jacket over a black shirt and carried a small backpack. "I don't like this, man. I don't like it," Ryu whispered. Water dripped from the piers around them and they could hear the scratching sounds of water rats going about their nightly business. "Just chill, man, okay?" Ken whispered back. "Everything'll be fine." "Man, if I had $1 for every time you said that," Ryu said. "Yeah, I know," Ken replied. "You'd be a rich man. If that's what you wanted, I don't know why you didn't just stay in Japan and work for your famous industrialist father." "Because I'm not a company man," Ryu replied. "Neither are you." "Right. We're just a couple of street fighters, con artists, who somehow managed to stay one step ahead of the law," Ken said. "So the last thing I need to listen to is your complaints." They heard the throaty grumble of an approaching AN patrol boat. A searchlight swept over them, and Ken and Ryu instinctively ducked. A second later, a staticky voice coming through a loudspeaker split the night's silence. "Attention! By order of Colonel Guile of the AN Forces, there is a 7 p.m. curfew in effect in Shadaloo City. Violators will be arrested. Anyone resisting will be shot." As the patrol boat passed, a rowboat hidden under the pier bobbed up and down in the wake. "Okay," Ken whispered, grabbing onto the pier. "Time to bail." Ken climbed out from under the pier and Ryu followed, clutching his canvas bag and shaking his head. "Why are we here?" he whispered. "We were doing so well with the street fights in Manila." "It was small change, Ryu," Ken reminded him. "Besides, you were in a rut. You kept winning." "And this is an improvement?" Ryu said, shaking his head. "Now we're in the middle of a war zone." "Placido, amigo," Ken replied as he walked quickly towards the dark warehouse. "Our luck is about to change. By this time tomorrow, we'll be on a plane, sipping champagne, eating caviar, and counting our money. Trust me, we'll be out of here before the first shot gets fired." "Drop your anchor!" a loudspeaker voice suddenly cracked through the damp night air. "Prepare to be boarded!" Startled, Ken and Ryu looked up. 100 yards up the dark river, a patrol boat had pulled alongside the ragtag rowboat. Pow! Pow! Someone from the sailboat started to shoot. Kaboom! The patrol boat immediately returned fire with its deck gun, ripping a huge hole in the sailboat's bow. Shattered pieces of wood, sails, and rope flew everywhere, and the sailboat quickly sank. Half a dozen men, apparently involved in some kind of illegal enterprise, dove into the water and started to swim for safety. Ryu gave Ken a baleful look. "Before the first shot gets fired?" "Hey, now how was I supposed to know?" Ken replied with a smirk. He stopped in the shadows next to the boarded-up door and knocked twice. The door swung open and Ken and Ryu were yanked inside by muscular arms. Bang! The door slammed shut behind them. Even before their eyes had a chance to adjust to the lights, massive hands patted them down, searching for weapons. The sound of a loud, excited crowd reached their ears. As Ken and Ryu's eyes adjusted, they found themselves at the edge of a crowd of nasty-looking hoods, seductively dressed women, and haggard gambling addicts pressing in towards a caged fighting ring. Clearly this was in violation of the AN curfew. The scene was immediately familiar. The crowd was gambling on the lives of 2 fighters in the ring. Ryu took a closer look and realized the ring wasn't marked off with ropes, but with razor-sharp concertina wire. This wasn't boxing. It was cage fighting, where anything was allowed, and the only thing that mattered was outliving the opponent. Ryu felt someone nudge him in the ribs. Turning, he found Ken winking at him. "I know you love this stuff," Ken said, teasing him, "but we're here on business." Ken started towards the stairs that led to the office above the fighting ring. Ryu followed. "Okay, we're off the street," Ken said in a low voice to his pal as they started up the stairs. "Feel safe yet?" Just then the crowd roared. Halfway up the stairs, Ryu turned and looked into the ring. A fighter stood there with his hands raised in triumph. Ryu noticed that the man was wearing a metal mask. A steel claw in his right hand was bloody, and at his feet the loser, his neck twisted in a way that left no doubt. He was dead. "Yeah," Ryu muttered. "Now I feel real safe." At the top of the stairs they were stopped by yet another guard, and again searched, as if they were somehow miraculously acquired weapons on the way up. To Ryu it meant that the man they were seeing took no chances. He had a bad feeling about this. A very bad feeling. They stepped into a smoke-filled room lit with dim lamps covered with sheer red material. The walls were decorated with gold and red oriental designs, and the floor was covered with oriental rugs. The room was filled with dangerous-looking thugs wearing jackets and ties. They might have been better dressed than the crowd below, but they were no less menacing. From their midst stepped a tall man with a completely bald head. He wore a black eye patch that only emphasized the cold glare of his remaining eye. His muscles bulged against the fabric of his shiny black suit. A blood-red tie hung from his neck. Ken and Ryu both recognized him at once. His name was Victor Sagat, and he was head of the Shadaloo Tong, a highly organized, extremely vicious gang that virtually ruled the city. "Good evening, gentlemen," Sagat said without offering his hand. Evening, Sagat, Ryu said, nodding down to the crowd in the caged ring. That's quite a party. Didn't anyone tell you there's a curfew? In Shadaloo, no one tells me anything, Guest Sagat replied coldly. May I offer you a drink? Let's skip the Miss Manners routine and get down to business, Ken said. You got the 100K? Sagat turned and snapped his fingers. One of his men came forward with an attaché case and opened it. Inside was 100,000 in American bills. Ryu felt his eyes widen slightly. Ken reached towards the money, but the man snapped the attaché case shut before he could touch it. Where are the weapons? Sagat asked. Ken glanced at the room full of heavies. They're hidden. Not far from here. Ryu knew that was his cue. He pulled out a walkie-talkie from his bag. When we get outside with our money, we'll call you on this and tell you where the guns are. Sagat gave them a nasty smile. You two are overly cautious. Yeah, we even sleep with seatbelts, Ken said, nodding to the attaché case. Now how about it? Sagat nodded and the briefcase was handed over to Ken. The tall man with the eye patch turned away. Hey, Ryu said, holding his walkie-talkie. Don't you want this? Sagat stopped and turned to them. I don't need you to tell me that the truck with the weapons is on the pier behind the Malpaza brewery. One of my men followed you yesterday when you hit them. In fact, my men have already unloaded the truck and brought the weapons here. Ken and Ryu glanced at each other from the corners of their mouth. Ryu felt a bolt of nervousness shoot through him and a knot in his stomach. This was bad news. Very bad news. Now the four men carrying complex-looking automatic rifles stepped out of the shadows. They jammed the ammo clips in and aimed their guns at Ken and Ryu. Ryu glanced at Ken. Everything'll be fine, huh? Hey, Ken replied with a shrug. I do the best I can. That's all I can do. Ryu swallowed and swore he'd never listen to Ken again, if he lived through this. Meanwhile, Sagat studied them. What's wrong, gentlemen? He asked with a sinister smile. Surely you're not afraid of your own weapons. After all, you were brave enough to steal them from the Pentagon. You told me so yourself. 2 men brave enough to rob the American military surely cannot fear a handful of simple men from the Shadaloo Tong. Sagat smiled and his men nodded. Ken and Ryu shut their eyes. Sagat's men squeezed the triggers of the guns. Bam, 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 bam! The automatic rifles opened fire. Ken and Ryu felt the bullets hit them and bounce off. They were harmless yellow Nerf projectiles. The guns were nothing but fancy toys bought from a manufacturer in Hong Kong. Just another one of Ken's great ideas for scamming bad guys. Never again, Ryu told himself. Toys, Sagat shouted furiously. You tried to sell me toys! Did you think you were dealing with a fool? Ryu shot Ken a look. I'm beginning to. Sagat, you have a sense of humor about these things, Ken said, scrambling to talk his way out of this. He held out the attaché case. Okay, here's your money, and we'll just take our toys back and... Sagat glared at them. Ken knew he had to change gears. Okay, keep the money and the toys, he said. Maybe you guys have kids. They love this stuff. By the way, we also have a connection for video games. I like my games live, Sagat spit ominously. And in living color. Make that dying color. Sagat turned and nodded at his men. The next thing Ryan knew, 6 of the biggest, meanest-looking thugs he had ever seen were charging towards him, pulling knives, blackjacks, and nunchucks, and none of those weapons looked like toys. Chapter 4. Ken threw the attaché case into one man's face, then leapt into the air and reversed roundhouse a second in the head. Ah! The man went flying backwards and smashed into a dresser. Wham! Pow! Crash! Ryu went into an offensive crouch and took out 3 thugs with a combination of vicious kicks and jabs. Ken brought another down with a jarring uppercut. 6, 7, 8 men went down, but more kept coming. Oof! Ken and Ryu fought valiantly, but the sheer mass of thugs overwhelmed them. Finally they were tackled and thrown down. Click, click. The cocked pistols were pressed hard against their temples. Standing amongst the prostrate bodies of the groaning men, Sagat crossed his arms and nodded gravely at the 2 street fighters. Interesting, he said with a bemused smile. Interesting, he said with a bemused smile. You 2 can fight. You're not all talk after all. I could have told you that, Ryu said. Bring them to their feet and follow me, Sagat ordered his men. With the cold, hard barrels of pistols pressed firmly against their heads, Ken and Ryu were yanked to their feet and led out the office down the stairs. The crowd of cutthroats and gamblers parted as Sagat marched up into the caged ring and turned towards the street fighters. "Which of you is the better fighter?" the Shadaloo Tong leader asked. Ken and Ryu both started to answer at the same time, but before they finished, a brutal-looking man climbed into the ring. His black hair was pulled back to a long braided ponytail. Naked to the waist, muscles bulging, he wore a steel face mask and black matador pants lined with a silver design. In the audience, dozens of women began to shout and wave. "Must be the popular guy with the ladies," Ken whispered to Ryu. Ryu nodded silently. Now he saw that attached to the fighter's right hand was a razor-sharp claw with blades extending at least a foot. Tattooed across his chest was a huge snake, the trademark of the Shadaloo Tong. This, Ryu realized, was the same fighter who had killed a man in the ring earlier in the evening. "So," Sagat asked, "have you made up your mind?" Ken and Ryu quickly pointed to each other and said at the same time, "He's the better fighter!" Sagat smirked and drew a coin from his pocket. He flipped it in the air and inspected it and pointed to Ryu. To the crowd he announced, "The challenger, Ryu! The defender, my champion, Vega!" The crowd launched into a fury of betting. In the ring, Vega removed his mask and bowed to the crowd. The women screamed with joy. Under the mask he was surprisingly handsome, but his eyes were chillingly dead. Hands reached towards Ryu and started to rip off his jacket and shirt. Off. He felt sick inside. Ken leaned towards him. "Don't worry, this guy's wearing knickers," he whispered. "He must be a wuss." "Those are matador pants," Ryu replied. "Those guys kill raging bulls with swords." "Oh, well, in that case, just remember everything I taught you," Ken whispered. "That'll last me about 10 seconds, Ryu whispered back. He pushed towards the ring and ducked under the wires. A gaudily painted woman offered him a machete. Ryu weighed the large knife in his hand and gazed across the ring at Vega with a razor-sharp claw. An idea quickly formed in his head. He couldn't stand a chance against that claw. Maybe he should just shame Vega into not using it. Ryu turned and hurled the machete into one of the wooden posts holding up the cage. Then he turned back to Vega and presented his bare hands, palms up. Across the ring, Vega scowled. He knew Ryu was daring him to fight without weapons. He wouldn't have done it, but in front of the crowd and all his fans, he couldn't back down. He slowly removed his stainless steel claw. Ryu felt a little better. His gamble had paid off. Standing beside the ring with Ken, Sagat nodded approval. "Good, no weapons. Any coward can pick up a gun or a knife. It takes a man to stand alone with an empty hand." The man sounded sincere. Ken gave him a curious look. "I almost believe you mean that." "I do," Sagat replied. "It's the difference between me and that maniac Bison." "If he's a maniac, why do you supply him with guns?" Ken asked. "I like to keep my maniacs happy," Sagat replied with a smile. The countdown began. Vega lowered his steel mask again, apparently wanting to keep his face pretty. "So what's the story with this guy?" Ken asked. "Vega?" Sagat said. "He was a matador in training, but he had a cruel streak." "I would have thought you need a cruel streak in this line of work," Ken said. "Maybe, but not one like Vega's," Sagat said. "He had no discipline. He likes only one thing." "Let me guess," Ken said. "Shopping?" "Killing," Sagat replied coldly. In the ring, Vega and Ryu began to circle each other. The bloodthirsty crowd began to roar. Weapons or no weapons, they wanted a fight to the death. Crash! There was a thunderous crash. Bodies started to hurl in all directions outside the ring. Ryu and Vega straightened up and watched in amazement as a huge dark green tank smashed its way through the wall of the warehouse and stopped with its cannon right in Sagat's face. The crowd stood in silent astonishment. Dust floated in the air and pieces of wall debris slid from the tank's glistening armor. The hatch popped up. A light blue beret rose up, followed by Colonel Guile himself. Hands on his hips, he gazed calmly at the warehouse full of criminals. "You're all under arrest," he said. In a flash, dozens of armed AA troopers flooded into the warehouse, quickly outnumbering the crowd. Clank, clatter, plang! The sound of weapons falling to the floor made considerable racket as the hoodlums raised their hands over their heads. Ken leaned into Ryu. "See," he said in a low voice. "Didn't I tell you our luck would change?" Chapter 5. The following day, Colonel Guile strode through the ANA headquarters dictating a letter to an aide, who scurried behind him. "Monsieur et Mademoiselle Charlotte, le sacrifice de votre fille ne sera jamais oublié. Votre sacrifice sera avengé. Sign and send it." "Right away, sir." The aide nodded and turned back to her desk. Guile went through the doorway and stepped into the briefing room. His military staff was seated around a long table. "Attention!" An AA guard barked, and the staff quickly rose to its feet. "At ease," Guile said, and took a seat at the head of the table. To his right, Cammy sat at a computer console entering data. The pretty blonde lieutenant had been assisting the colonel since they'd met in Operation Desert Storm. Several years later, she'd been abducted while on a secret intelligence mission in Bosnia. Guile had gone in and rescued her, but not before she'd been tortured and scarred for life. Now, seeing the aide through the doorway, she leaned towards the colonel. "Colonel," she said, voicing what the rest of the staff was wondering, "are you really going to write to every mother of every soldier who died?" "Yes," Guile replied, "but the letter I really want to write is to Bison's mother. Only I don't think he had one." The staff laughed. Guile glanced at the large clock winding down on the wall. "The countdown clock?" he guessed. "We want to keep it where we can all see it," one of the staff members replied, while a white-jacketed waiter filled glasses around the table with water. Guile nodded. "New business?" A young Japanese captain rose from his seat. "Yes, Captain Sawada," Guile said. "Colonel, my commando team is at full readiness," Sawada reported. "But we need to know if the assault will be by land, sea, or air." "I'm afraid that's the question of the day," Guile replied and turned towards his lieutenant. "What have you got for us, Cammy?" The trim lieutenant rose and gestured towards a large video monitor in the corner showing aerial photography of various computer modes. "Thanks to the colonel's unorthodox psychological warfare the other morning," the words brought laughter from the staff, "we were able to get Bison to break radio silence. Unfortunately, not long enough to pinpoint the source of his signal. At this point, all we can say for certain is that the base is hidden somewhere here, in the River Delta region." Using a pointer, Cammy gestured to a marshy region of land to the north. "We'll have to go up there and search on the ground," Sawada said. "No," Guile said. "That could take weeks. We have fewer than 3 days." "Yeah!" Without warning, the waiter pulled a long knife and leapt onto the table, diving at Guile. Crack! Crunch! Guile caught the attacker by the elbow and drove him face first into the table. The man twitched slightly and then lay motionless. "Any other business?" Guile asked. His staff stood with stunned expressions on their faces, staring at the body of the man lying on the table. "All right, I have some," the colonel said. "How did this crud get in here?" Guile looked hard at T-Hawk, who was usually in charge of security. The tall Native American stiffened. "Sir, there is no excuse for this," he replied. "As an officer in charge of security, I take full responsibility." Excuse me," Cammy came forward. "If I may, Colonel, T-Hawk's not quite right. He was in the hospital with that head wound when the locals were hired. The Shadaloo liaison officer was supposed to vet the headquarters staff, but obviously he didn't do it very well." Guile turned to the security officer. "Is that right, Sergeant?" Well, yes, sir, but it's no excuse," T-Hawk sputtered. "If I hadn't stuck my head up and caught that shrapnel..." Guile smiled and gave him a mock slap on the head. He was lucky that he had soldiers like this on his side, who refused to make excuses, who even took responsibility for others' mistakes. Guile only hoped he would be a worthy commander of a team like this. Meanwhile, Cammy moved to the man on the table and pulled open his shirt. "Here's your explanation, sir," she said, gesturing to the large tattoo of a serpent curled round a dagger on the man's chest. "The Shadaloo Tong." "Victor Sagat's organization?" Guile said. "Yes, sir." "Refresh my memory, Lieutenant." "Before the Civil War, Sagat was an absolute crime lord here," Cammy explained. "All criminal activities, including drugs, extortion, smuggling and gambling, are controlled by the Tong. But rather than stand up against Bison, Sagat decided to profit from him instead. Now he supplies Bison with all his weapons." "Don't I have Sagat locked up in the Stockade this very moment?" Guile asked. "Yes, sir," Cammy replied. "And he's still pulling strings?" Guile mused. "Let me get him into interrogation room," T-Hawk said with a growl. "I'll cut his strings for him." "No, wait!" Guile was getting an idea. "This could be the break we've been looking for. If Sagat runs guns to Bison, then he must know where Bison's secret command post is. All we have to do is infiltrate someone into his gang and follow the next shipment." The staff members exchanged looks. Cammy cleared her throat. "Excuse me, sir, but Sagat didn't get to the top of the Asian underworld by taking chances. Even in normal times, he trusts no one. Now, in the middle of this war, he's bound to suspect anyone we try to plant on him. He's not exactly the type who makes new friends." Guile had just begun to mull this over when the sounds of a commotion rose from the stockade outside. "What's going on out there?" Guile asked T-Hawk, who stepped over to the window and looked out at the stockade outside the headquarters building. The stockade was basically a fortified courtyard for holding criminals until they could be processed. The ground was dirt, and a few old green tarps hanging overhead kept the rain out. "Well, sir, unless I'm imagining things," the chief of security said, "we've got a full-scale riot in the stockade." Guile rushed out the room. He didn't need this now. They were wasting valuable time. Chapter 6. A little while earlier, Ken and Ray, dressed in blue prisoners' clothes, had moved through the stockade food line, pushing trays with their fellow detainees. On the stone walls around them, AN guards patrolled, keeping an eye on the prisoners below. Others stood on tall bamboo gun towers. The cook slapped a large ladle of unidentified brown gloop on their plates. "I'm quoting you now," Ryu muttered to Ken. "You said by this time tomorrow we'd be on a plane, sipping champagne and eating caviar and counting our money." He nodded down to the food line. "I guess the caviar must be down there." "Yuck, yuck," Ken smirked. "I just don't get why I listen to you," Ryu said. "Because I have the ideas," Ken replied. "All your ideas ever do is get us close to being killed," Ryu said. "And all you do is complain," Ken said, his voice filled with annoyance. "Yesterday you were worried we were going to get stuck in the middle of a civil war. Presto changeo, today you're clean, well-fed, and in protective custody. Now what's wrong with that?" Ryu saw something that gave him doubts. "It may be custody, but I'm not so sure it's protective." Ken followed his friend's eyes to a group of men. Sagat was in the middle of them, glaring at Ken and Ryu. Sagat whispered something to one of his men, who moved off and signaled someone. Ryu watched as the signal traveled from thug to thug. The future was starting to grow dim. "I think I just lost my appetite," Ken muttered, putting down his tray. He and Ryu started out of the food area, but a wall of grim-looking thugs forced them back in. Suddenly a canvas tarp fell from above, blocking off the food area from the MPs patrolling the stockade from above. Ken and Ryu found themselves in deep shadow. The kitchen workers ducked beneath the counter. "I guess lunch is over," Ken said. "Too bad. I was looking forward to seconds." Thugs started to close around them, the makeshift knives at their hands glinting faintly. "How come they have weapons and we don't?" Ken whispered. "Because they have friends around here," Ryu whispered. The thugs charged. Whack, whomp, wham! Fighting back to back, Ken and Ryu kicked, smashed and chopped, and jabbed at the seemingly unending stream of thugs. A burning sensation slashed through Ken's biceps as a thug cut him in the arm. Ken grabbed the man, snapped his arm behind his back, and threw him into 3 others. 2 men attacked Ryu, one from either side. He leaped into the air and did an aikido split, catching both in the Adam's apple. As he landed, he found Vega coming towards him with a crude jailhouse version of his claw strapped to his hand. "Vega!" Ryu went into a crouch. "I was afraid we'd never finish our fight." "You should be afraid," Vega replied with a cold smile. The claw whipped through the air, Ryu ducked, and the claw scraped the brick wall, kicking up a shower of sparks. Ryu lunged up. Whack! He caught Vega on the wrist, and sent his claw flying. The handsome killer spun around, ready to take on Ryu barehanded. Ryu smiled. This was a fight he'd been waiting for. "Back off! Back off!" Suddenly, AN guards pushed their way through the crowd. Ryu felt hands grab him and pull him away from Vega. Well, there would always be tomorrow. Colonel Guile stood with T-Hawk and Cammy on the stairwell on the other side of the stockade yard. They'd just watched Ken and Ryu fight. Guile knew immediately that there was something different about those two. "Who are they?" Guile asked. T-Hawk opened a dossier. Inside were mugshots and confiscated passports. "Ken Masters and Ryu Hoshi. A couple of low-rent operators wanted for scams all around the Pacific Rim. We took them in last night's sweep." "Are they part of Sagat's organization?" Guile asked. "Actually, no," T-Hawk replied. "They're both pretty good backgrounds. Hoshi's from a big Japanese industrial family. He's college-educated. Master's father is a politician back in the U.S. "Black sheep," Kyle guessed. "Couldn't speculate, sir." "What were they doing with the Shadaloo-Tong?" Guile asked. "Got me," T-Hawk answered with a shrug. "But they weren't selling Girl Scout cookies." Guile rubbed his chin. "What about that truckload of toy guns we confiscated? Could they have had something to do with that?" "Could have," T-Hawk said. Guile smiled. "So these 2 men were scam artists, and nervy ones at that." They might have been scam artists, but chances were they came from backgrounds where good was valued over evil. "Get them patched up and bring them to me," the colonel said. Then he turned to Cammy. "If Sagat won't trust any new friends, maybe he'll trust some new enemies." Cammy frowned. She believed wholeheartedly in her boss, but sometimes she simply didn't understand him. Dressed with a scarf on her head, sunglasses, and many strings of pearls, Chun-li looked less like a news reporter and more like a wealthy tourist as she strode the water taxi to the docks of Shadaloo City. The streets before her were crowded with people on foot, on bicycle, in rickshaws, and on motorbikes. In the daylight hours, business went on as normal. Stepping off the taxi, she started to make her way through the crowded city street. Grimy workers and women lugging bundles stepped out of the way, and a line of ragtag street urchins followed behind her, offering to sell her trinkets and begging for food. Chun-li turned down an alley where a small truck was parked. 2 large men halted nearby. For a brief moment, Chun-li felt a chill of fear. Then she realized they were her crew, Warlord and Honda, in disguise. If it weren't for the fact that you're 7 foot tall and about 400 pounds, I might not have recognized you, she said to Honda. The one thing I can't do is make myself look like a midget, the technician replied. So, did we get it? Chun-li asked. Honda nodded at Balrog, and together they pulled up a tarp on the back of the truck. Inside were several large wooden boxes marked Danger, High Explosives. Chun-li grinned. Looks like we've got it. The wound on Ken's arm was dressed. He and Ryo were cleaned up and issued new prison clothes. Now they stood on the dock behind the AN headquarters. Colonel Giles stood nearby as they watched a boatload of shadowy refugees pull in. Neither Ken nor Ryo knew why they were there. We waiting for someone? Ken asked. I saw you two fight, Giles said. I know you've been trained, but what I don't know is whether it's all in your fists. We're pretty good on our feet too, Ryo said, making a joke. Gala didn't smile. He pointed to his head. Didn't your sensei put anything here? He gestured to his heart. Or here? Do we have any chi, or is it all smoke? Ryo glanced at Ken and didn't answer. What was this, kindergarten for martial arts? Look at them, Giles said. Ken and Ryo watched as the injured refugees were taken off the ship on stretchers. The walking wounded came next, hobbled on crutches or being pushed in wheelchairs. They were followed by dozens of emaciated-looking men and women, and crying babies and children in tattered clothing. These are the minority who have survived Bison, Giles said. No matter where they turn, there's warlord or black marketeer or worse. Now maybe these people have a chance, because they've made it to Shadaloo City, but those hostages Bison is holding don't even have that. What is this? Ken asked. A guilt trip? Let's call it a reality check, Giles replied. He turned and started to follow the refugees into the large warehouse that had been outfitted as a field hospital. Doctors and nurses greeted the wounded and sick and tried to comfort them. Ken and Ryo looked around and winced. Giles kept walking and tapped his finger on the dossiers he carried on both men. Manila, Hong Kong, Shadaloo, you justify your little con games by telling yourselves that you've been stealing from criminals, but the criminals you rob have been preying on these people. Where does that put you on the food chain? Are you really the same as Sagat and Bison? Or am I right, and you're different? Ryo glanced at the refugees. Men with parts of their arms or legs missing, children with bloated, empty stomachs. He glanced at Ken, and they both winced. This was something they'd never thought about. Now they both knew they'd never put it out of their minds. You're right. We're different, Ryo replied. Can we leave now? Giles stopped and studied them. The only way you two are leaving, he said with an odd smile, is over my dead body. Chapter 7. The cold steel pneumatic doors opened and Bison stepped into the laboratory of Dr. Darlism. Zangief followed a respectable distance behind. Chained and shadowed by an armed guard, the former professor of genetics from the University of Calcutta stood at a computer console. Beyond the console was a large white brainwashing chamber with round greenish glass portholes. Through those portholes one could see Carlos Blanca, his head covered in virtual reality goggles and earphones. Long plastic IV tubes snaked round into his arms. So, Dr. Darlism, how is your research today? Bison asked. The same, the scientist muttered. Corrupted, warped. My science twisted to serve perversion instead of peace. The conversation made Zangief's brow crease. The man was a physical giant, but mentally completely naive. Meanwhile, General Bison pouted at Dr. Darlism's hard words. Doctor, how can you say that? He asked. Very easily, Darlism replied. Sometimes I wonder if you know the irony behind all this. That when your men kidnapped me in Stockholm, I was there to warn the Nobel Committee against the sort of deviant work you now force me to do. Bison stepped closer and put his hand onto the doctor's shoulder. I see that you are not happy. Tell you what, after I crush my enemies, we'll see about getting you published. That should cheer you up. Hardly, Dr. Darlism muttered. Now, let's have a look at our patient, Bison said. The mad warlord peered over the console and into the chamber where Charlie Blanca sat, strapped to a cushioned chair. Bison glanced back down at the computer and the medical readouts. His brain functions are very low, he observed. Perhaps if your soldiers haven't beaten him senseless, he'd be a bit higher, Darlism replied. You are a pessimist, Bison replied with a shake of his head. You look at this and you see a brain that is half empty. I am an optimist. I see a brain that is half full. And once you fill it completely, our Captain Carlos Blanca will be a perfect soldier. You mean a perfect killer, Darlism corrected him. Let's not quibble over words, Bison said with a shrug. In the brainwashing chamber, Blanca whimpered and shifted against the restraints. "What was that reaction to the programming?" Bison asked. "What is he receiving?" "See for yourself." The doctor hid some keys in the console, and rapid-fire images began to splash down across the monitors. Bison was entranced as a montage of mankind's worst violence from antiquity forward passed before his eyes. The Roman Colosseum, massacres, pogroms, concentration camps, human slaughters, Russia, Germany, Bosnia, Somalia, followed by a portrait gallery of history's worst villains, Attila the Hun, Nero, Hitler, Stalin, and finally, Bison himself. The warlord turned away from the monitor, perplexed. "This is merely educational software. Why does our guinea pig find it disturbing?" "Because unlike you, he's not a psychotic." Whap! A backhand slap caught Dahlesm on the jaw and knocked him to the floor. The warlord stood over him, glowering. "You take too many risks, Doctor," Bison said with a growl. "Do not presume so much on my good nature. Now that Blanca's brain is in the process of becoming a killing machine, my loyal scientist will start on his body." As Bison said this, several younger scientists in white Bison lab coats entered the brainwashing chamber and began to disconnect the IV lines running into Blanca's arms. "What are they doing?" Dahlesm asked, with a gasp, rising to his feet. "He needs those nutrients. Without them, he'll—" The doctor's words trailed off as he watched the scientists attach new IV lines from thick bags labelled Danger, DNA mutagens, Use extreme caution, and anabolic plasma, warning, toxic at high doses. "Without them, he'll do very nicely," Bison finished Dahlesm's sentence. "Don't worry, Doctor. Our baby is going to grow up big and strong. Very strong." Bison turned to his scientist. "How long will it take until his muscle mass has doubled?" 24 hours, sir," one of the scientists replied. "Very good," said the warlord. "In 24 hours, he is going to be field-tested in combat." The scientists nodded eagerly. Unlike Dr. Dahlesm, they did not work for the warlord against their wills. In fact, they were loyal, dedicated, and just about as demented as Bison himself. The warlord spun on his heels and headed out. Dr. Dahlesm gazed at the poor man in the brainwashing chamber. The terrible greenish DNA mutagens and pink anabolic plasma flowed through his veins, transforming it into precisely the kind of protoplasmic aberration Dahlesm had been haunted for years. And yet, here he was, aided and abetting the cause. The doctor felt his shoulders sag with self-disgust at what he'd become. "Back to work," muttered the guard who watched over him. Dahlesm nodded, and the guard slid his electric prod back into his holder. Out in the hallway, Zangief's confusion finally poured out as he followed his great leader. Zangief had joined the Soviet army aged 14, so his entire life had been filled with propaganda and lies. Now he believed in Bison, his leader and savior. "Dahlesm was disrespected, General. He called you evil names. Why do you permit this?" "You must sympathize with Dahlesm," Bison replied in an avuncular mood. "You see, he actually believes the poisonous lies about me that have been spread by my many enemies. He doesn't understand that I am the only one who can save the world from the Allied nations' tyranny." In his own semi-intelligent way, Zangief was touched by this. "The poor man! Someday he will know the truth like me." "We can only pray," Bison said with a roll of his eyes. The members of the Tong, chained together in small groups, were led out of the stockade. Sagat and Vega led the way. Several groups back, Ken and Ryu followed. They were all led towards a waiting truck. Behind the truck's cab was a large wire cage used for transporting criminals. "Take them to the harbour," Guile ordered the truck's driver. "The Navy has a brig waiting for them." The commander waved at the Tong leader. "Bon voyage, Sagat. Enjoy the sea air." "This isn't over, Guile," Sagat snarled back. "I own this city." "Well, I'm the repo man," Guile replied with a smile, "and I just took it back. Looks like you're out of business." The commander went back to his headquarters. Ryu gave Ken a sour look. "You just had to come to this country, didn't you?" he said angrily. "Man, don't you ever stop complaining?" Ken asked. "I really don't understand you." "The only thing I don't understand," Ryu said, "is why I listen to you. You can't think, and you can't fight." "Oh yeah?" Ken spat back. "Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think I'm sick of your mouth." Despite the chains, the two men began to struggle. T-Hawk and an MP jumped into the fray and separated them. "Knock it off, dirtbags!" T-Hawk shouted. "Get in the truck!" Ken and Ryu climbed into the cage behind the truck. In the shadows inside, their animosity quickly disappeared, as Ryu held up a small keyring. Sitting across from them, Sagat's eyes went wide. How? He gasped. Hey, I was a good pickpocket as a kid, Ryu said as he started to unlock the chains around Ken's feet and then his own. Throw me the key, Sagat hissed. Get real, Ryu muttered, sliding the key into his pocket. I'm serious, Sagat insisted. I will make it worth your while. Oh yeah, that's a good one, Ken nodded dubiously. And I'll bet you want us to come to your warehouse and collect it, like last time. No, no, Sagat shook his head vehemently. Forget our past. I can help you escape the city. You need me. Ha, Ken laughed. You think I can't find my way out of this city on my own? Can you? Ryo asked. Ken and Ryo shared a questioning look. Hey, Ken said, when have I ever let you down? When haven't you? Ryo answered back. Some of Sagat's men smiled. You'll never make it out of the city without my help, Sagat said. Oh yeah? Ken said, puffing up his chest. Ryo tapped him on the shoulder. Did it ever occur to you that the great Colonel Guile still has our passports? Oh, right. Ken's chest sagged. Passports, Sagat smiled. A simple matter. I could have new ones in a matter of hours. Ken nodded and glanced at his partner. That would make it a lot easier. Okay, Sagat, Ryo passed the keys to the Tong's leader. But we want those passports. We're taking you at your word, Sagat, Ken said. Which is probably the dumbest thing we've done since we tried to sell you toy guns. You won't be sorry, Sagat replied, hastily unlocking his shackles and those of his men. A moment later, Ryu and Vega jumped off the back of the truck. Chong! Vega took down an AN guard with a vicious kick to the head, while Ryu yanked the truck driver out of his seat and jumped in the cab. He jammed the truck in gear and started to drive through the compound, heading towards the gates. No, you don't! T-Hawk jumped onto the running board and tried to grab the steering wheel. As they grappled with each other, the truck veered forward. Ryu grabbed T-Hawk's pistol from the sergeant's belt. MPs took aim, but another yelled to hold fire for fear of hitting Sergeant Hawk. Crash! The truck smashed through the sawhorses and careened around the corner in front of the AN headquarters. The collision knocked T-Hawk off the truck. Hey, Ryu! Ken shouted from the back of the truck. Ryu looked at the side view mirror and saw his friend hanging out the back of the truck, waving. Throw me the gun! Ken yelled. Ryu tossed T-Hawk's pistol out the window. Ken caught the weapon. The compound gates loomed ahead. As Ryu steered the truck towards them, Colonel Guile ran out in the street and drew a bead on the oncoming truck. The AN soldiers aimed their rifles. Don't shoot! T-Hawk yelled. You'll hit the Colonel! The commotion brought Chun-li running from inside the media center. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. With only a pistol cupped in his hands, Colonel Guile was trying to face down the truck speeding straight towards him. Blam, blam! Guile fired. Hanging out the back of the truck, Ken drew T-Hawk's pistol and aimed. Blam, blam! The shot struck Colonel Guile directly in the chest, spinning him away from the truck. Chun-li gasped. She had seen enough violence in her life to know a dead man when she saw one, and Colonel Guile was definitely a dead man. Stunned, she still had a presence of mind to yank the wireless mic from her blouse. As the truck barreled past, she rolled forward like an acrobat beside it, and smacked a mic against the wheel well. The mic held, and Chun-li rolled to the side, just barely escaping the truck's tires. Balrog and Hondo rushed towards her, but she was already rising to her feet and running toward the body of the man who had promised to bring them all peace. Chapter 8. Bison, the warlord announced with a satisfied smile. Before him on the table was a model of the future, of his future. The abandoned building stood at its center, but it was now surrounded by high-rise buildings, sculpted landscaping, tennis courts and golf courses. And Bison land? The warlord asked, turning towards his architect, a young bearded German lad wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a uniform of Bison's staff. From the monorail here, the young man said, pointing to the monorail station, it will take 3 stops at your theme park, the Hall of Villains, Tragic Mountain, and the Death God Center. The Death God Center. Excellent, Bison said, circling the model with a metal pointer. The temple above us was the wonder of the ancient world. Bisonopolis will be the wonder of my world. The warlord stopped and scowled. Is there something wrong? The architect asked. The Galleria Bison, the warlord muttered. The mall? The architect frowned. I thought you were pleased with it. The food court should be larger, Bison said. All the big franchises will want in. Through the open door of the fortress control room came dramatic news-breaking music, accompanied by a television voice. We interrupt our regular broadcast with a special bulletin from Shadaloo City. Bison looked up, interested. Through the doorway he could see his favorite news reporter appear on the bank of monitors. Normally the picture of collected coolness, the pretty young Chun-li Zhan actually looked rattled. Dateline Shadaloo City, Shadaloo, Southeast Asia, she began. The world is in shock at the news that Colonel William F. Guile has been killed. Startled by the unexpected development, Bison dropped the pointer. He stepped to the doorway to get a better look. It happened just 30 minutes ago, Chun-li went on. During a jailbreak by Victor Sagat, the crime lord who has been the principal arms supplier for the renegade General M. Bison. It was hoped that the Allied nations' forces would restore order here and that Colonel Guile will be able to free the 63 hostages now held by Bison in a countdown to death. But after today's shocking tragedy, nothing is certain, except that Bison's mad threats will continue and that the new AN commander's first order of business will be to bury Colonel Guile. For GNT, this is Chun-li Zan. How touching, Bison thought with a sigh. He raised the remote and lowered the audio on the video screens. Then he stood in silence, digesting the news. That's great news, General, DJ cried. Congratulations! Bison nodded slowly, knowing the Jamaican electronics tech was only trying to score brownie points. On the contrary, Bison replied. I mourn. I was hoping to face Guile personally on the battlefield. One gentleman warrior to another in respected combat. Bison clenched his fists. And then I would snap his spine. The warlord shook his head sadly. Ah, the road not taken. He snapped his fingers. Bring me my field armor. Several pretty acolytes immediately stepped forward and started to snap the armor onto Bison's shoulders, arms and legs. Bison seemed to be in a pensive, reflective mood. Why, he asked to no one in particular, why do they still call me a warlord? And why mad? All I want to do is to create the perfect genetic soldier, not for power, not for evil, but for good. The guards around him nodded obediently. Carlos Blanca will be the first of many, Bison stated, with his voice rising. They will march out of my laboratory and under the leadership sweep away every adversary, every creed and nation until the entire planet is in the loving grip of the Pax Bisonica. The guards glanced furtively at each other, but Bison caught their looks. They were soldiers, not intellectuals. They couldn't be expected to know that in Latin, Pax Bisonica would mean the period of peace the world would soon embrace under the benign rule of Bison. Peace will reign, Bison said, his voice growing softer. War will end forever. All humanity will bow to me in humble gratitude. The guard came forward and whispered something to DJ's ear. The electronics whiz turned to his leader. Excuse me, General. The convoy is ready to escort you to the thieves' market. The warlord raised a remote to the screen and flicked the image of Dr. Darlism's laboratory. The doctor appeared with his back to the camera as he worked the computer. In the background, Carlos Blanca remained in the brainwashing machine. He appeared to be larger than before. Doctor, Bison said, I will be gone until dawn. I want the subject ready the moment I return. With his back to the camera, Darlism nodded. Bison felt a tug of annoyance in the man's insolence. Darlism, he barked. The scientist turned and faced the camera with a startled expression. That's better, said the warlord. You will look at me when I address you. Dr. Darlism's eyes narrowed with anger. You've murdered this boy once already. If you put him into combat before I run diagnostics, you'll kill him again. Don't worry, Doctor, Bison assured him. I'm going to start him out with something easy. Like what? Dr. Darlism asked. Like, a demented smile grew on Bison's face. Killing the hostages. Darlism's jaw dropped and his skin turned pale. If Bison used Blanca to kill the hostages, then, for all intents and purposes, Darlism was killing them as well. The sun was going down. Outside the AN headquarters in Shadaloo City, news crews and reporters milled around restlessly, waiting for some word on the Allied nations' plans now that Colonel Guile was dead. The GNT newsfeed to the mobile van was coming in broken up, so Chun-li had climbed through the roof hatch and was checking the antenna wires for a loose connection. How's it going up there? Hondo asked from inside. I think I found the problem, Chun-li called back. How does it look down there? Can't tell yet, Hondo yelled back. Rap, rap. Someone banged on the outside of the van, and Chun-li looked over the side to find Sergeant T-Hawk looking up at her. 5 minutes to curfew, ma'am, the sergeant informed her. If you're not out of here by then, I'm impounding this vehicle and you along with it. I'm very sorry, Sergeant, Chun-li replied. We just couldn't get a clear fix on the satellite. We'll be out before curfew, I promise. Knowing that little female charm never hurt, Chun-Li gave a warm smile and batted her eyelashes. T-Hawk smiled back, and then set his stopwatch. That's 5 minutes, starting now. The smile vanished from Chun-Li's face. These AN troops were simply too well trained. Meanwhile, T-Hawk turned to the rest of the crowd. Listen up, people, he shouted. Once again, he started to give them the curfew warning. Hey, Lee! Balrog called from inside the van. I think you got it! I'm coming down to take a look, Chun-Li said. She descended back into the van. Honda and Balrog were jammed inside, huddled around scanning screens. They were packed in there like sardines. Very, very large sardines. I hope we're making progress, Chun-Li said, pulling the hatch closed above her. We've just got the official 5-minute warning. Relax, Honda muttered. They don't got a jail in this town that can hold me. None unless they keep them supplied with unlimited hoagies, Balrog added, giving the bigger man a playful nudge. Hey, watch the elbow, Honda grumbled. What do you want me to do, cut it off? Balrog shot back. There's no place else to put it. Enough, you two, Chun-Li said, pointing to the scanner. How about getting this thing to work? Honda flicked a switch. Ta-da! The screen flicked to life, and a map of Shadowley Province appeared on the screen. A small glowing red dot moved across it. You're a genius, Chun-Li gave Honda an affectionate rub on the head. There's our wireless mic. Looks like the truck is on the coast highway, heading north, Balrog said. Any good guesses as to where they're headed? Chun-Li asked. Honda and Balrog looked at each other, and were struck simultaneously with the answer. The Thieves' Market. Chun-Li nodded. Yes, that has to be it. Suddenly the picture broke up with rising bands of static. Darn! Chun-Li leaned forward and tapped the screen with her knuckle. There's that interference again. I guess it's time to go back on the roof. Wait! Balrog peered closely at it. Correction, that's not interference. It's too steady. Now Chun-Li gave a closer look. The cameraman was right. Whatever was breaking up their signal was too constant to be random. So what's causing it? Honda asked. The answer struck Chun-Li like a bolt. Unless all our equipment needs a tune-up, we're not the only ones who put a tracking device on that truck. Huh? Honda frowned. She's right, Balrog said. We got two signals mixing up. That's what's causing the distortion. Wait a minute, Honda said. I thought I was the electronics tech here. Let's analyze the other signal, Chun-Li said. Balrog's fingers flew over the keyboard like a concert pianist. Show off, Honda muttered. You could do it too, Balrog replied, if you didn't have fingers the size of bananas. Chill, dude, Honda said, holding up massive hands, before these bananas close around your neck. Hey, we're all on the same side here, Chun-Li reminded them. Yeah, the heavy side, said Balrog, peering at the oscilloscope. Okay, here's the analysis. Steady flux, narrow bandwidth. Looks like it's aimed at... Balrog frowned. Aimed at what? Chun-Li asked. This doesn't make sense, Balrog said. Leave that to me, Chun-Li said. Well, unless I'm totally off, it's aimed right back here, Balrog said. At the AN headquarters. Here? Honda frowned. That makes no sense at all. On the contrary, it was clear to Chun-Li that it did make sense to someone. They just had to find out who. Rap rap, someone was knocking at the driver's side window. Chun-Li didn't have to look to know who it was. It's Sergeant T-Hawk, Balrog said. Time to bail. Chun-Li pushed Honda towards the driver's seat. You drive. Hey, I was gonna eat, Honda complained. Later, Chun-Li said, giving Balrog a nudge. You're in the passenger seat. What is this? Balrog asked. Just go, said Chun-Li. Honda got behind the wheel and started to drive. In the back of the van, Chun-Li kept her eyes on the scanner while she started to unbutton her blouse. She glanced up and noticed that Honda was watching in the rearview mirror. Watch the road, Chun-Li ordered. Honda grinned but looked away. I don't know what you find so interesting, Chun-Li muttered as she changed her clothes. You've only seen me do this 100 times. Hey, there are some things I never lose my appetite for, Honda quipped. Like hoagies, Balrog said. Well, you should have other things on your mind right now, Chun-Li chastised him, only half seriously. That second homing signal bothered me. Personally, I don't like mysteries. There's always a murder before the last chapter. What do you want us to do? Balrog asked. You two follow the signal, Chun-Li said. She adjusted a skin-tight black ninja outfit she'd just pulled on. I'm sure it will lead you to the Thieves' Market. And we just walk in and say hi? Borog asked. You can do better than that, Chun-li said. Infiltrate. Why do I think they might notice a 7-foot, 400-pound sumo try to infiltrate? Hunter asked. All right, Chun-li said. If you can't infiltrate, then entertain. Entertain? Borog scowled. Darn, I left my harpsichord at home. Be resourceful, Chun-li said. I know you'll think of something. I'll catch up with you at the thieves' market. Catch up? Borog raised a curious eyebrow. Yes. Right now, I'm going to find out who's playing games with us. Chun-li reached for the roof hatch and pushed it open. She started to climb up. Watch your back, Lee, Honda said, glancing at her in the rear view. Chun-li paused for a second. I didn't know you cared. We don't, said Borog, with a wink. But you're the only one who can sign our expense accounts. Chun-li grinned and climbed onto the roof of the moving van. It was dark now. In her black ninja suit, she was barely visible. The van stopped at the gate, leaving the A compound. A guard raised the traffic arm to let the van into traffic. At that moment, Chun-li leaped silently onto the roof and onto the archway above the gate. Crouching low without making a sound, she crept along the wall towards the headquarters building. Somewhere in there was the answer. She just had to make sure she didn't get killed trying to find it. Chapter 9. Chun-li followed on the top of the wall until she found an open second-floor window. She slipped through it and into a dimly lit corridor. Now what? From a pocket, she drew a device about the size of a small calculator. It was a miniature scanner, just like the one they used in the van. The homing signal came in strong. It seemed to originate somewhere in the basement of the building. Chun-li found a stairway and started down it, her feet padding more quietly than the cat's. A door banged somewhere below. The sound of rapid footsteps coming up the stairs towards her caused her to duck behind a doorway. That blonde lieutenant, Cammy, dashed past, coming so close to Chun-li that she practically grazed her outfit. Chun-li slipped back into the stairwell. Outside in the halls, the AN headquarters was filled with people. Most of them, hopefully, would be using the elevator. The mini-scanner led her to a silver door in the basement marked Morgue. Chun-li frowned. This made no sense at all. Chun-li closed her hand over the cold silver doorknob and turned. The lock clicked and the door opened. She slipped in and let the door close. The room was dark and cold, illuminated only by a scant rays of moonlight through the window. Chun-li pressed her back against the wall and waited for her eyes to adjust to the dark. Meanwhile, despite all her training, her heart was beating fast and her breath was short and cloudy in the chilly air. A thin sheen of perspiration broke out across her forehead. The truth was, she hated dark. Cold rooms filled with bodies. As her eyes adjusted, she could see the metal cabinets along the wall, each drawer precisely the size necessary for the storage of a body. Rows of industrial shelves held large jars containing various body parts. Not far from the wall was a table with a body covered in a sheet. Chun-li caught her breath. Oh no. It had to be Guile. She fought back the desire to bolt out of the door and instead looked out at the scanner. The signal was stronger than ever, and it seemed to be coming from across the room. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For the sake of all those who had died like Colonel Guile, and for the sake of all those lives who were in danger, she had to get control of herself and press forward. Eyes locked on the mini-scanner, she stepped tensively across the room, trying not to look at anything else. Her concentration was so focused she didn't even notice how close she came to the body lying on the table. There. On a stand next to the table was a small receiver. It had to be the one tracking the second signal. So someone in the AN headquarters was tracking the truck after all. But who? The answer came in the most unusual way. A hand shot up from the body and grabbed her arm. Ah! A scream ripped from Chun-li's throat. Colonel Guile sat up bare-chested in the dark, letting the sheet slide away. If I wouldn't give you an interview when I was alive, he said with a chuckle, what made you think I would give you one when I was dead? Angered by the scare he'd given her, Chun-li yanked her arm out of his grip and glared at him. You scared me, she gasped, still trembling. Hey, come on. I couldn't resist, Guile said with a smile and a wink. Chun-li felt her anger fade. He certainly could be charming when he made the effort. And now the events of that afternoon were beginning to make sense. Of course, she said with a knowing nod. Those two young men. They were the only ones who were not in the tongue. One of them killed you. They're working for you, aren't they? Guile slid across the table and stood before her, eyeing the black ninja outfit. Are you asking me as a reporter, or as something else? Chun-li had no intention of answering him. Just at that moment the morgue door swung open and Sergeant T-Hawk dashed in, drawn by Chun-li's scream. You! He frowned at the sight of Chun-li in black. Miss Zhang has a nice fashion sense, don't you think? Guile asked his aide. Not bad, T-Hawk replied. clearly appreciating the way the outfit hugged her body. "If you gentlemen are finished discussing my wardrobe," Chun-li said with a scowl, "I'll be on my way." She turned to go, but T-Hawk immediately stepped in her way. "What's this?" Chun-li asked, although she had a pretty good feeling what was going on. "Sergeant," Guile said, "take the mysterious Miss Zhang into custody. She's to be held in complete isolation until further notice." Chun-li spun around, her eyes wide. "No, wait, please, Colonel, don't!" "I'm sorry, Miss Zhang," Guile replied, "but I don't know what you're doing here in that outfit, or what your motives are. Obviously you're now privy to information that can endanger my operation, and the lives of my men undertaking it. I can't let you walk out of here." "All right, I'll tell you what I want to know," Chun-li said. "You're right. I'm not here to cover the news. I don't want a story about Bison." Guile looked surprised. "Then what do you want?" "I want his head." Guile crossed his arms and nodded slowly. The explanation didn't surprise him in the least. A madman like Bison couldn't destroy lives forever without engendering some sort of vigilante revenge. "It's taken me 20 years to get this far," Chun-li continued. "You can't lock me up now, not when I'm this close." Her yearning and pain were so real that Guile could almost reach out and touch them. But at this point his operation had a far better shot of cutting Bison down than one young woman dressed in a ninja outfit. "Take her away," Guile said. "Yes, sir." T-Hawk stood firmly by her arm and started to lead her towards the door. It opened as Cammy hurried in, pistol drawn. She too had heard Chun-Li scream. "Cammy, go with T-Hawk and Miss Zhang," Guile ordered. "We don't need any more problems." "Yes, sir." Cammy took Chun-Li's other arm. As they went out the door, Chun-Li turned back towards Guile. "I should have known you wouldn't understand," she said angrily. "I understand better than you know," Guile replied. "But this war isn't about your personal vendetta." T-Hawk and Cammy led her out. Guile turned to pull his shirt on. No, it wasn't about Chun-Li's personal vendetta. It was about his. He was going to save his friend Charlie Blanca if it was the last thing he did. "Hey!" It was T-Hawk shouting from down the hall. Something must have gone wrong. Guile rushed to the morgue door. Swinging it open, he saw a figure in black do a series of rapid backflips down the outside corridor. Crash! One last backflip and Chun-Li sailed through the window at the end of the hall and disappeared into the dark. Humiliated that she'd gone, T-Hawk hung his head, but Guile could only smile. So there really was a ninja inside the suit. "Sorry, sir," T-Hawk muttered. "What a screw-up." "No," Guile grinned to himself. "What a woman." On a remote piece of land up the coast where access could only be gained via one heavily guarded road stood the thieves' market. Here, among makeshift tents and shacks, unsavory merchants sold everything from guns and plastic explosives to prisoners and stolen computer access codes. Here, the well-heeled buyer with a taste for mayhem could pick up a few red-tipped cruise missiles, a heavily armed helicopter, or even a little Russian plutonium to set at the heart of a homemade nuclear device. At the center of the camp stood the largest and newest tent, flying the silver and red banners of General M. Bison. Parked next to it were several trucks loaded with fresh munitions, recently delivered by Victor Sagat. The tent was lit by candles and small fires. Music was supplied by a small band of musicians playing drums, cymbals, and flutes. In the middle of the tent, on a dais, Bison in his armor sat on a raised throne while a mixed and motley bag of thieves, guests, and guards milled about. Near him, seated on a less ornate and lower chair, was Sagat. Bison insisted that he attend the party as a way of thanking him for the newest shipment of deadly supplies. Across from them was a small raised stage of black and white tiles, and the Bembelli brothers performed magic tricks that mostly involved them throwing their lovely female assistant around in the air and randomly smashing large pieces of furniture to bits. The Bembellis were both large men dressed in turbans and robes. Their curvaceous assistant wore a tight purple outfit with a mask made of pink feathers. Not far away, Ken and Ryu sat watching the show. "Don't they look familiar?" Ryu asked. "Who?" Ken replied, munching on a drumstick. "The Bembellis and their cute assistant," Ryu said. Ken glanced up at the stage. "Maybe we saw them in Singapore or somewhere." "No, it was more recent," Ryu said. "Well, I don't know," Ken said. "I think I would have remembered the babe. She's hot stuff." Ryu noticed that the fighter Vega, seated near Sagat, was giving them a disgusted look. "What happened, Vega?" Ryu asked. "Eat something that disagreed with you?" "What are you two doing here?" Vega asked. "Hey, if it wasn't for us, you'd be in the brig right now," Ken said. "I don't trust either of you," Vega spat, "and you owe me a fight." "It's on a rain check," Ryu replied. On the stage, the Bembelli brothers said something about preparing for their greatest illusion. Accompanied by their master assistant, they bounded off the stage and disappeared, to be replaced by half a dozen scantily clad dancing girls. Ken looked around, meeting unfriendly glares from every direction. Turning to Rai, he spoke in a low voice. "This place makes downtown Detroit look like Disneyland." "Oh, be cool, man," Rai whispered back. "Oh, sure," Ken said. "Meanwhile, the only thing I can't figure out is whose lowlifes are going to kill us first, Sagats or Bisons?" Before Rai could answer, he heard an angry grumble behind him. Turning around, he found Zangief gnawing on the leg of a boar. "Did you say that General Bison was a lowlife?" The huge man grunted as he wiped his mouth in the back of his hand. "Lowlife?" Ken swallowed. "No, I said great life. What a great life it is working for General Bison." "You have served General Bison." Zangief looked surprised. "Why Zangief not know you?" Ken glanced nervously at Ryu. You don't remember that night in Shadaloo City?" Ryu asked. Several thugs turned to listen, and now he addressed all of them. "Zangief here wasn't satisfied with 2 women he'd already met. He had to steal ours too." The thugs nodded, impressed. Zangief counted on his fingers. "Zangief meet, 4 women?" "Believe it," Ken nodded. Zangief grinned and spread his huge arms, pulling them into a bear hug. "Little buddies!" "Ugh! Ah! Crash!" Near them a fight broke out amongst some of the more feisty guests. Bison's armed guards were on them in an instant, cracking their skulls with the butts of rifles and dragging them away. Ken poked Ryu gently in the ribs. "I think it's time we got out of here." "Guile was right," Ryu replied, giving his friend a critical look. "You have forgotten everything our sensei taught us about trust and honor." "Our sensei also talked about the dragon punch, where the fighter's inner spirit gets released," Ken reminded him. "Yes, the Shoryuken. So I think dragons and honor have a lot in common. They're both imaginary." "Look, we made a deal with Guile," Ryu said. "We're in this thing until we get the homing device into Bison's fortress. As soon as we've done that, and Guile can find the place, we get our power spots back, and we're free to go, okay?" His pal didn't answer. Ryu turned and discovered Ken wasn't even there. His friend was pushing through the crowd towards the corner of the tent. Now Ryu saw why. The Bembelli brothers' pretty assistant was beckoning Ken towards her. Ryu swore to himself and got up to follow. It seemed as if all he ever did was keep his buddy out of trouble. Ryu moved through the crowd. Ahead, he saw Ken follow the girl through the folds of the tent. Had it been any other occasion, he would have backed off and minded his own business. But not tonight, not with all these bad guys around. Ryu reached the fold of the tent and found the opening. He pushed his way through. A dozen yards away, a smaller tent belonged to those Bembelli clowns. Ryu caught a glimpse of Ken going in. "Sorry to spoil your fun, buddy," Ryu thought as he swept back the canvas cover on the Bembelli's tent. Whomp! Something huge hit and threw him to the ground. The next thing Ryu knew, he was pinned to the earth by the strongest man he'd ever encountered. Chapter 10. Despite the overwhelming odds against him, Ryu started to struggle. Next, he felt a sharp edge of a knife against his throat. "Stop fighting or die," a female voice ordered. "I hate multiple choices," Ryu said. The massive hands holding him down let up while someone yanked Ryu's arms behind him and tied his hands with a rope. Ryu looked up. The pretty acrobat he had been admiring earlier was holding a knife on him. A few feet away, Ken lay on the ground, his hands tied by the Bembelli brothers. "We don't want to hurt you," Chun-li addressed them both. "Well, you sure have a funny way of showing that," Ryu said. Chun-li ignored him. "We know you're working for Colonel Guile." Ryu blinked in shock. No one was supposed to know that. Why did she look so familiar? Chun-li leaned in closer. "You may not believe me, but we're your friends." "My friends don't tie me up," Ken shot back, and then remembered something. "Well, there was this girl in Miami once." "It was Atlanta, brain," Ryu corrected him. "No, man, I'm sure it was Miami," Ken said. "Shut up," Chun-li snapped. "But you should have seen her," Ken said. "I don't want to know about it," Chun-li replied impatiently. Ryu kept staring at her. He was sure he knew her from somewhere. Then it hit him. "Wait a minute," he said. "I know you. You're that newscaster from the Global News Network, Chun-li." He twisted round and looked at the men who'd just tied his hand. "And you're Edmund Honda, the sumo from Hawaii. You almost made Yokozuna." "Until the Shadaloo Tong destroyed my reputation," Honda said bitterly. "How?" Ryu asked. They had a betting scam going, Honda said. They told me I had to tank a match. I wouldn't do it, so they made sure I would never wrestle again. And they did the same thing to me, said Balrog. Ruined my boxing career. Ken looked up at Chun-Li. Let me guess, they ruined your figure skating career? Don't try to be cute, Chun-Li snapped at him. That's like telling Stimpy not to cover up hairballs, Riot cracked. All right, enough, Chun-Li shouted impatiently. All you need to know is that the weapons and munitions Bison and Sagat deal in have brought misery to thousands, and in 10 minutes those same weapons are going to send them straight to hell. You've had your warning. Time to prepare the truck, Honda said. Honda and Balrog started out of the tent. Chun-Li stood with her hands on her hips and stared at Ryu and Ken, as if not sure what to do with them. Just out of curiosity, Ken said. You know that Sagat and Bison are in the next tent with several hundred armed men. How are you three gonna send them straight to hell? We won't. But their shipment of weapons will, with a very big bang, Chun-Li smiled. Oh, I think I get it, Ken said. If you don't, you will soon, Chun-Li said, and then she reached behind Ken and Ryu with a knife and quickly cut the ropes binding their hands. Ryu and Ken got up and looked at her in astonishment. You mean we can go? Ken asked, mystified. Quickly, if I were you, Chun-Li warned him. Well, okay, I'd still like to get your phone number, Ken said. Go, Chun-Li shouted at him. Come on! Ryu grabbed his buddy by the collar and yanked him out of the tent. Ken went with a shrug. Guess I'm not her type. Consider yourself lucky, Ryu muttered. In the main tent, Bison was pleased with the show, turning his head to the Shadaloo Tong. Ah, this is the life, eh, Sagat? To watch girls dance and breathe the night air, to mingle with fellow warriors. But Sagat wasn't taken in. Yes, thanks to you there are thousands of warriors in Shadaloo tonight. Enemies you brought to our shores when you took their citizens hostage. You fear a paper tiger, Bison replied with a dismissive wave of his hand. With Colonel Guile dead, the democracies of the world will rattle their swords and quietly slink away. Now, on to business. I trust you have come prepared? Sagat snapped his fingers, and his men brought forth a dozen long, rectangular wooden boxes. Breaking one open, Sagat lifted out a field green automatic rifle with a large night scope. Bison took the weapon from him, cocked it, and aimed through the scope. Excellent, Bison said. With these weapons, the world will learn to fear me as much at night as they do during the day. Sagat rolled his eyes impatiently. Would this blowhard ever cease talking? Bison handed the rifle back to Sagat's thug and turned to the head of the Shadaloo Tong. I am pleased with your goods, Sagat, he said grandly. Now, as payment, after I deal with the AN, what if I were to share the country with you? When this war is over, we'll see how much of this country is left, Sagat said dryly. In the meantime, let's see the color of your money. It was Bison's turn to snap his fingers. Several guards lugged strong boxes towards Sagat and opened them to reveal neat packets of $100 bills. Sagat smiled, but only for an instant. There was something wrong with the money. Reaching down, he picked up a handful of bills and inspected them. Unbelievable. Each one had Bison's portrait on it. Chapter 11. Ken and Ray re-entered the tent just in time to see Sagat jump up from his seat and bellow, Is this a joke? The leader of the Tong threw bills at Bison. This money isn't worth the paper it's printed on, the warlord reacted calmly, with the serene, undying confidence of a true madman. On the contrary, every Bison dollar will soon be worth 5 British pounds. Sagat stared at him like he was out of his mind. How do you know that? That is the exchange rate that the Bank of England will set once I've kidnapped their queen, Bison informed him. Ken glanced at Ryu and whispered, Chun-Li said in 10 minutes this whole place is going to be toast. This can't get any worse. This conclave is over, Victor Sagat shouted. I must have been insane to think I could do business with you, Bison. You're a raving lunatic. Sagat grabbed a handful of bills and threw them into a nearby fire. Crack! Bison's heavy hands crashed down on the table, smashing it in two. Finally the warlord had lost patience. He had enough of these insults. In a flash, Sagat's thugs leaped to their feet and took their leader's side. Bison's guards did the same. Suddenly Ken and Ray found themselves between the two angry, trigger-happy men. I thought you said it couldn't get any worse, Ryu whispered, eyeing the savage men surrounding them. I was wrong, Ken admitted. It just got worse, a lot worse. Wham! Up on the dice, Bison swept back his cape and unleashed a powerful blow. Whap! Sagat ducked and blocks it, and then countered with one of his own. Bam! Slap! Pow! Smack! Like expert fencers who couldn't get past each other's defense, the two leaders punched and counterpunched. Meanwhile, their troops began to face off for one last cataclysmic marathon brawl, with Ken and Ryu caught in the middle. This doesn't look good, Ken whispered. That's an understatement, Ryu whispered. Got any ideas? Ryu couldn't believe it. How come I'm always the one who has to come up with the ideas? Why can't you ever come up with any? On both sides, the group of ferocious killers, with blood in their eyes, drew weapons and advanced. I've come up with plenty of ideas, Ken shot back. Wasn't it my idea to sell toy guns to Sagat? Oh yeah, Ryu nodded. That was one of your truly great brainstorms. Hey, it almost worked, Ken sniffed. Well, almost doesn't cut it, Ryu said. Almost doesn't get us champagne and caviar. Almost doesn't get us first-class plane tickets out of this mess. The only thing almost ever gets us is almost killed. Desperate for a way out, Ryu looked towards the stage. Honda and Bulwark, still in their disguise of the Bembelli brothers, had just brought out a large, ornate Chinese box. Ryu had an idea. He turned to his partner. Back me up, he said, hissing. Ken crossed his arms and shook his head. Back yourself up, he replied with a pout. Don't quit on me now, Ryu said, hissing again. I've got an idea. Whoop-de-doo. Ken was really peeved. There was no time to waste. Ryu ran up onto the dais and got between Bison and Sagat. Blam! He punched Bison as hard as he could in the jaw. Despite himself, Ken rushed forward. Wham! He delivered a crushing blow to Sagat. The two powerful leaders stumbled backwards in shock. A split second later, Ken and Ryu were surrounded by cocked weapons and glinting knives. How dare you interfere! Bison roared. I had to, General, Ryu quickly explained. You should not be fighting your great ally Sagat, not when the allied nation spies are among us. Where? Bison gasped. Ryu pointed at the stage as Honda and Bulwark stepped into the Chinese box and pulled the door closed behind them. Bison, Sagat, and the others instantly rushed to the stage, but when Bison pulled open the door, the Bembelli brothers had vanished. In their place was a small video monitor. As they all watched, it crackled to life, showing a picture of Chun-li. Beside her, Honda and Bulwark were pulling off their Bembelli costumes. Behind them was a truck. Bison, Sagat, Chun-li addressed them. All of your weapons of death that you deal with are about to be blown sky high. Too bad you're in the same tent with them. As they all watched, Chun-li nodded to Honda, who reached into the truck and released the emergency brake. The truck rolled away. Happy landings, Bulwark waved, and then he and the others disappeared into the dark. DJ poked his head around the monitor. General, I'm pretty certain this is a live telecast. Someone at the end of the tent parted the flaps. Now they could all see the truck bouncing and barreling towards them down the hill. Bison and the others looked back to the monitor, which also showed the truck careening towards them. What do we do? DJ asked. Change the channel, Zangief suggested. Evacuate! Bison shouted. Everyone ran. Kaboom! Chun-li's truck filled with crates of dynamite smashed into two of Sagat's trucks filled with guns and ammunition. The explosion was so great that people were picked up and flung through the air like dolls. A huge mushroom cloud of flames rose into the sky, lighting up the jungle for miles in every direction. Oof! Ryu landed in some bushes. Ow! Ken crashed to the ground near him. Ryu got to his feet and dusted himself off, and helped up his partner. You okay? Ryu asked. Oh, sure, Ken groaned. Like every day I get blasted 60 feet through the air. Piece of cake. Now two large figures near them picked themselves up off the ground. Bison and Sagat. Bison studied Ken and Ryu, and then turned back to the man he'd just been hand-to-hand combat with. Sagat, are these men with you? The warlord asked. Yes, Sagat nodded. Apparently the blast had knocked out whatever animosity the two men had for each other. They're the ones who broke us out from the prison. Sagat pointed to Ken. He killed Guile. Bison looked impressed. He turned back to the Tong leader and extended his hand. Forgive me my temper before, comrade. Sagat hesitated and then shook it. Having made peace, they turned and stood together before the assembled throng of thugs and renegade soldiers. The crowd raised their fists and shouted, Victory! 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 Standing beside Bison and Sagat, Ken nudged Ryu with his elbow. Nice going, dude. Hey, what did I do? Ryu asked. You just doubled the size of Bison's army. Ken said. If Guile wasn't already dead, this would kill him. I still don't understand why you had to warn that nut about the truck. I couldn't let Bison die here, Ryu said. Why not? Ken asked. It's as good a place as any to kill an insane megalomaniac warlord. Listen, Ryu said. If Bison died here, we might never find his fortress. We might never find the hostages. I had to make sure he lived. Tell that to them. Ken nodded towards the clearing where Zangief and some of Bison's troopers appeared, dragging Chun-li, Honda, and Bulwark. The three had their hands tied behind their backs and were being pushed along roughly. They got caught, Ryu gasped. Thanks to us, Ken said guiltily. Bulwark, Honda, and Chun-li were led past them. Chun-li stared daggers at them. Hey, all's fair in love and war, Ryu said, trying to make it appear as if he was on Bison's side. Chun-li didn't answer. She just spit at him. Bison's troopers beside her laughed and dragged her away. Chapter 12. The mood around the long wooden table in the AN headquarters was tense. Less than an hour before, the homing signal they'd all been waiting for had been picked up by an AN spy satellite high above Southeast Asia. It could only mean that Ken and Ryu had managed to reach Bison's fortress. Finally learning where the fortress was, Colonel Guile had immediately ordered his staff to formulate different attack plans for freeing the hostages. Now Captain Sawada had just finished a lengthy presentation on the merits of an AN air attack, but it was clear that Colonel Guile wasn't happy. Thank you for the presentation, Captain, the Colonel said, rising to his feet. I'm afraid, however, that an air attack would result in horrendous casualties. You mustn't forget that Bison has an extremely sophisticated ground-to-air weaponry. We know what North Korea, Iraq, and Libya have sold to him. It's possible he's even got Patriot missiles. What else would you suggest doing to save the hostages? Sawada asked. The only chance we have is an attack with a small amphibious force, Guile said. By water? Sawada made a face. That means going up Shadaloo River. Anyone crazy enough to do that would be a sitting duck. Unless you can squeeze under Bison's radar net, Guile said. What we need is a single vessel equipped with stealth technology to go up the channel first and distract Bison's defenses. While they're distracted, the rest of the amphibious force goes in, riding as low as possible under the radar net. A single boat against everything Bison's got? Sawada said, shaking his head. The pilot would have to be out of his mind. Fortunately, Bison has driven me crazy, Guile said with a wry smile. He held up his watch. I'm gonna take the lead boat. Everyone synchronize watches. It's now 0500. Cast off is 0600. Assemble your teams, gentlemen. This is it. It wasn't long before row after row of attack boats were lined up on the wharf. Standing in front of them were teams of troops in battle fatigues and light blue battle helmets ready for action. Guile, accompanied by Captain Sawada, stepped up to an outdoor lectern with a microphone to give the men their final orders. Guile was wearing a bulletproof battle vest. He was just about to begin an address when a long black limousine with a fluttering AM flag on fenders pulled up. Guile recognized the car immediately. It belonged to the Undersecretary General of the Allied Nations. The limo stopped. The driver hopped out and opened the door for the Undersecretary, a short, dignified-looking man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a dark suit. The Colonel turned away from the lectern and saluted stiffly. Mr. Undersecretary, this is a surprise. As you were, Colonel, the Undersecretary replied, casting a critical eye towards the troops waiting to board their boats. Well, welcome to the Shadaloo front, Guile said. Your timing is perfect, sir. You're just in time to see the kickoff for the rescue mission to bring back the hostages. The Undersecretary studied Guile for a moment and then shook his head. I'm afraid not, Colonel. The AN Security Council has voted, and they've decided to negotiate. What? Guile was certain he must have heard wrong. The Undersecretary couldn't have said that. They think that they can deal with General Bison, the Undersecretary explained. We're all very appreciative of your efforts, but you are hereby instructed to call off the assault at once. And let the hostages be murdered? Guile asked in disbelief. No, said the Undersecretary. You are to contact Bison and request an extension of the deadline. Oh, and I'm sure a madman like Bison will agree to that. Guile's words were heaped with sarcasm. He will when you tell him we are prepared to pay his ransom demand, the Undersecretary said. Guile stared at the man, not sure who was crazier, General Bison or the AN Security Council. Excuse me, sir, but are you aware that the ransom is for $20 billion? We are. And has it occurred to anyone that if we cave in and pay $20 billion, there's nothing that prevents Bison from taking more hostages next month and asking for $50 billion, and the month after that for $100 billion? Heck, why stop there? Why not just ask for all the money in the world? The lines between the Undersecretary's eyebrows deepened. Colonel, have you lost your mind? No, Gall replied, but you've lost your guts. The Undersecretary's face hardened. Colonel, you are hereby relieved of your command. Gall felt his blood starting to boil. He spun around and grabbed the microphone off the lectern. Soldiers, he announced, I have just been given new orders. Our governments say the war is cancelled. We can all go home. The look of shock and loud murmurs rippled through the assembled troops, but Gall wasn't finished yet. Yes, we can all go home, he said, his words seething with fury. Meanwhile, Bison gets rewarded for his crimes, and our friends and comrades who have already died here will have died for nothing, but we can all go home. Meanwhile, the ideals that brought us here, ideals like peace and freedom and justice, they get packed up along with our tents and our blankets. But we can all go home. The Robin's egg-blue helmets shook back and forth. Not a soldier broke from the ranks. Well, I'm not going home, Gall shouted. I'm getting in my boat, and I'm going upriver, and I'm gonna kick that crazy warlord's butt so hard that the next Bison wannabe is gonna feel it. Now who here wants to go home, and who here wants to go with me? The troops shouted and cheered, and then turned to their boats. Gall turned and smiled politely at the Undersecretary. Colonel Gall, the man gasped, this cannot be permitted. It's insubordination. You must stop them. I'd love to, sir, Gall said with a shrug, but I'm not in command anymore. And with that, he turned and went to his boat. Ryu and Ken stood in the command room of General Bison's fortress, staring at a map of the grounds displayed on a bank of video monitors on the wall. Standing near them were Sagat, Vega, and the other princes of the underworld. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair, Bison cried with gleeful madness. They had just been giving a video tour of the fortress. Even Ryu had to admit he was impressed. You know, I'm starting to think this guy really could rule the world, Ken whispered. If all it took were guns and weaponry. I might have to agree, Ryu whispered back. Impressive, is it not? Bison asked grandly. You've just seen the best and most modern technology of both East and West, while their governments scorned me. Their corporations adored me. Gee, Ken whispered to Ryu, that's all I ever wanted, just to have a couple of large corporations adore me. Who needs girls? Zangief, Bison ordered. See that our new friends Ken and Ryu are given clean clothing. What a guy, Ryu mumbled. Hey, those red uniforms could catch on, Ken said. Meanwhile, Bison turned to Sagat and his men. Sagat, Vega, you're welcome to stay here. You may find some of the coming events most educational. What's he talking about? Ken whispered. I think we're either going to see Bison become a multi-billionaire or 63 hostages are going to get fried, Ryu whispered back. Just then they heard scuffling footsteps and the sounds of angry murmurs. A squad of Bison's men led Chun-li and Honda and Balrog into the room. They were all shackled and their faces were bruised. What about these enemies of General Bison? Zangief asked. Take those two to the interrogation room, Bison commanded, pointing at Honda and Balrog. They will talk or they will die. Preferably both. The warlord turned and gazed at Chun-li. A sinister smile appeared on his face. Take the journalist to my chambers. We have decided to grant her a private interview. I understand, my general. Zangief grabbed her by the arm and started to lead her away past Ken and Ryu. As Chun-li passed them, her eyes raked them with hate. Ryu wished he could explain that things were not as they seemed, that the only reason he and Ken appeared to be on Bison's side was to get the homing device into the fortress so Gall could find it and save the hostages, but that would be impossible to explain. Chun-li still thought Gall was dead. The best Ryu could muster was another weak smile. Chun-li responded by spitting at him again. You know, Ken said, you keep that up and you're going to get dehydrated. Then Ken turned to his partner and whispered, this sucks. They're the good guys, like us. Lately I don't feel very good, Ryu muttered, glancing at the countdown clock. There were fewer than 4 hours before either the ransom money was paid or the hostages were massacred one by one. So now what? Ken asked. Ryu looked down at his tattered, dirty clothes. Like the boss said, I guess we get new duds? One of the guards led them down a corridor to a barracks area that sort of reminded Ryu of a locker room. They were instructed to throw their old clothes into a disposal hatch where it was quickly incinerated in a ball of orange flame. Then they showered and changed into red and white karate robes with silver Bison insignia on the breast. Ah, Ken smiled, combing his wet hair. I feel like $1,000,000. If you felt like 20 billion, we could ransom the hostages, Riot quipped. So now what? They looked around the room and noticed that the guard that escorted them to the barracks was gone. Guess we're on our own, Ken said. Nah, let's take a walk, said Ryu. They started out of the barracks and past savage-looking Bison troopers coming in. Ken grinned and kept up steady banter. Hey, how you going? Nice gun you got there. Long live Bison! Turning to Ryu, he whispered, I'm getting tired of this. Why? Ryu asked. You're a natural lowlife. Hey, lowlife's better than no life, Ken said. The sooner we escape, the better. Did you happen to get a look at the video map of this place? Just the left side, Ryu said. Good, because I got the right side, Ken said. Let's go. Where? Get Honda and Balrog before the torturer turns him into hamburger, Ken said. I thought you wanted to escape, Ryu asked. I do, Ken answered. But after we save their butts, Honda and Balrog are going to help us find the exit. They headed down the side corridor and then down the stairs towards the dungeon. Balrog had been in a lot of tight squeezes before. It was the sort of thing that came with the territory, but he couldn't remember when things looked as bleak as they did right now. He and Honda were in a dungeon under the fortress, a place that made him feel as if they'd stepped back in time 1,000 years. Chained to an ancient stone wall by his wrists and feet, he could feel the cold dampness of the rock at his back. Except for the huge, rough-hewn wooden door and some tiny barred windows, the room was lined with stone. It was gloomy, dank, and smelled like centuries of sweat and terror. A pile of old human skulls lay in one corner, covered with cobwebs. Whap! A few feet away, a tall, bulky torturer in black clothes whipped a rat and cane against Honda's back. Honda was locked in some kind of ancient wooden rack. Balrog winced at the sound and the imagined agony his buddy must be in. But Honda hardly blinked. Balrog couldn't imagine how he could stand the pain. Whap! The torturer brought the cane down on the sumo's back again. Balrog grimaced. Maybe Honda wasn't showing it, but he had to be suffering mightily inside. Balrog felt his stomach twist and growl from the combination of hunger and anxiety. Whap! Balrog wanted to scream out and tell the torturer to stop, but if words could kill, he would gladly use them now. Then, miraculously, the torture did stop. Huffing and puffing from exertion, the torturer came towards Balrog. You are next, Yankee, he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Maybe you ought to lie down and take a rest first, Balrog suggested. Smack! The torturer punched him hard in the face, then turned and left the room. Balrog winced as his friend's eyes met his. Long, ugly slashes and bloody, swollen red welts rose from Honda's back. Where do you think he went? Honda asked. I don't know, Balrog said. Maybe he decided to take my advice. Or maybe he just went to find something he could do the job a little faster, Honda said. The dungeon grew quiet. Balrog looked at Honda, but he could no longer see his friend's face. Honda kept his head hung. He seemed to be breathing slowly. Hey, Ed, Balrog said softly. You okay? I guess. That guy was a total sadist, Balrog said. How'd you keep up from crying? I'm sumo, Honda said, between laboured breaths. My body can be in one place, my mind in another. Well, next time your mind leaves, Balrog said, tell it to bring back a pizza. Honda smirked, and then turned to his friend. Balrog could see the pain in his eyes. Listen, if he starts on me again, I don't know if I can take much more. Balrog nodded. He knew it had taken a lot for Honda to admit that. He had to do something. He didn't know what, but something. He looked around the dungeon. There were plenty of things he could use if only he could reach them. But as long as he was chained to the wall in this ancient dungeon... Wait a minute, that was it. The manacles that held him to the wall were anchored in 4 spots, one behind each foot and each hand. Pulling with all 4 equally, he didn't have a chance of breaking free, but maybe if he just concentrated on one, concentrating with all his might, grunting and grimacing as hard as he could, he started to pull against the chain holding his right hand. What are you doing? Honda asked. What does it look like I'm doing? Balrog replied with a grunt. Forget it, Honda said. These things have been in that war for 1,000 years. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping, Balrog replied. But the chain holding his right hand wouldn't give. Finally, Balrog gave up, exhausted by the effort. Save your strength, friend, Honda warned. You'll need it later. But Balrog was certain they had a better chance now than later. Pausing until he had regained strength, he started to pull the chain holding his left hand. Balrog, you're crazy! Honda sounded worried. Wedging his elbow against the cold stone wall, Balrog gave all the strength he had, but once again it wasn't enough. He flopped back against the wall, his chest heaving for breath. Hey, I appreciate the effort, Honda said. Balrog nodded, but inside he knew he had to do it. Just trying wouldn't help his friend. He had to succeed. Wait a minute. Balrog reached his right hand out as far as the chain would allow. Honda looked up at him curiously. Now what? Grab my hand, Balrog said. Why? Just do it! Hey, this isn't a Nike commercial. Someday you'll have to explain to me how you can make jokes in a situation like this, Balrog said. But right now, if you don't grab my hand, you're gonna have to face whatever that guy comes back in here with. Okay, you just convinced me, Honda said, reaching out and grasping Balrog's right hand with his left. Okay, now pull, Honda said, grunting. The two men strained against the chain, holding Balrog's right hand to the wall. Their muscles bulged, their sweat dripping down their face, their hands throbbed, and they kept until, crunk! With a small amount of dust, the chain pulled out of the wall. The effort left them both exhausted. Their arms hung limp for a moment as they caught their breath. You should have told me you had Wheaties for breakfast, Honda said with a wink. With his right arm free, Balrog now went to work on the manacle holding his left hand. Crunk! Now that one gave way as well. My hero, Honda sighed, batting his eyelids. You just better hope I get my legs free before the torturer gets back, Balrog said, straining with all his might against the chains holding his right leg. It wasn't long before Balrog had pulled himself free from the wall. Freeing Honda was simple. Balrog found a metal bar and prized the big man's manacles from the rack. Way to go, bro! Honda and Balrog exchanged high fives. Now let's blow this joint. Balrog turned to go but suddenly stopped. He could hear the sound of scuffling in the hallway outside the dungeon, then footsteps. Someone's coming, Honda said with a hiss. Balrog quickly reached down and picked up a length of loose chain. Honda did the same. Then they hid behind the large wooden door. A moment later the door creaked open and Ryo and Ken peeked in. Whoosh! 2 necklaces of chain whipped through the air and caught each man by the throat. Balrog and Honda pulled hard on the chain, strangling Ryo and Ken and instantly bringing them to their knees. Well, look who it is, Balrog said gleefully. Our little buddies who double-crossed us. Ryo and Ken gasped for breath. Their lungs were burning. Their necks felt like they were about to snap. Ken managed to utter, gasping. Balrog looked at Honda and frowned. What did he say? I think he said, hail to M. Bison, Honda said. These guys must be double agents. Crazy fanatics, Balrog muttered and choked Ken harder. Ken just barely managed to say without a gasp. You know what? Balrog said. I think he's saying he can lead us outside. You think? Honda asked. Ken and Ryo's faces turned red as tomatoes. Their eyes were bulging. Ryo's field of vision was starting to narrow as he slipped into unconsciousness. Let him go and see, Balrog said. Honda let Ken go. The American street fighter slumped to the floor, gasping for breath. Did you say you can lead us outside? Honda asked. No, Ken replied, gasping again. I said we're on the same side. Chapter 13. Chun-li burned with hatred and humiliation as she stood in Bison's private quarters, staring up at a huge portrait of the man she despised over all others in the world. The painting showed Bison on a bucking stallion with his hand in the air and reminded her of one she'd seen of Napoleon. Chun-li would have ripped the painting off the wall, but her hands were tied behind her with leather straps. Bison's acolytes had dressed her in a sheer red dress with a high slit, like the one geisha girls wore. Other Bison aides had applied heavy white and red makeup to her face, and had parted her hair back in the middle, creating 2 braids that were coiled and pinned on the sides of her head. Apparently this was how Bison liked his women, painted, helpless, and tied up. Chun-li glanced around the room. It was a monument to an egomaniacal madman, from the ornate chandelier made of human bones to the furniture all designed in the style of winged insignia Bison was so fond of. A door behind her opened, and the renegade general himself stepped in. Ah, I see you appreciate fine art, Bison said. Chun-li glared at him. I would, if there were any around here. Bison only smiled and removed his hat. You seem to be very angry with me. You ridicule me. You tried to kill me. Why? Because I hate you. Chun-li practically spat the words out. Such strong feelings. Bison undid his cape and hung it up. Why? We've never met. 20 years ago, Chun-li said icily, I was a girl, living in a small village, just over the Chinese border. You were just another petty drug lord. You hadn't promoted yourself to general yet. Then it was quite a while ago, Bison said, with a nod, as he unsnapped his shoulder armor. You and your gang of murderers gathered your ounce of courage to raid across the border, Chun-li said. You needed food, weapons, slave labor for your fields of poppies and hemp. My father was the village magistrate. He had once been a respected judge in Beijing, but the Red Guards had forced him out. He was a simple man who brought the village a simple code, justice. When he heard you were coming, he gathered the few people he could to stand against you, and they won. You and your bullies were turned back by simple farmers with axes and pitchforks. Bison shrugged as he undid the metal gauntlets covering his forearms and set them down at the table. My father saved his village, Chun-li went on, but it was at the cost of his own life. You had him shot as you ran away. You were a hero at 1,000 paces. Bison pulled on a maroon smoking jacket and tied it at the waist. He pressed a button on the wall and 2 doors parted, revealing a hidden bar. He poured drinks into 2 metal flagons, each decorated with the silver Bison insignia. He stirred them with plastic twiddle sticks molded in the same design. I am sure you remember it quite well, Chun-li said, but Bison shook his head. Sorry, I don't remember any of it. You don't? Chun-li was stunned. For you, the day that Bison graced your village was the most important day of your life, the renegade general said pompously. But for me, it was Tuesday. Chun-li could hardly contain her fury. Across the room, Bison reclined on a sofa and sipped his drink. So, this is how you've spent your life, Bison asked. Seeking revenge. I spent the past 10 years in the media world, Chun-li said. I used my credentials to gather intelligence. I found partners who hated you and your friends as much as I did. The sumo and the boxer. Bison swirled the ice cubes in his drink and took another sip. Then he turned to the elaborate music system and turned on some slow mood music. The lights around the room dimmed. Most importantly, Chun-li said, I studied the martial arts of 3 continents. I learned to kill in 1,000 ways so that one day I could avenge my father and put an end to your reign of terror myself. I don't think so. Bison shook his head with an amused smile. I have spies everywhere. No one has ever seen you in combat. You've always hidden behind your 2 powerful friends. Why, I know for a fact that since you have entered this country, you have not thrown a single punch. Chun-li watched silently as he stretched out and relaxed. Let me tell you something, my dear. I know women, and you are harmless. That's exactly what I wanted you to think, Chun-li replied. Bison smiled at her. Chun-li smiled back. Yatta! She screamed. Snap! In a clean, deft move, she broke the leather straps binding her wrists behind her back. Startled by a show of hidden strength, Bison started to rise from the couch. Yachi! Fists clenched, legs extended, Chun-li launched herself at him in an impressive display of martial art perfection. Wham! She kicked the general so hard in the chest that he was driven back into the sofa, cracking the frame in half. Bison tumbled to the floor in an explosion of splinters and upholstery. Chun-li landed beside him in a graceful roll. Bison started to pull himself up. Whack! Chun-li caught him on the side of the head with a powerful spin kick. Crash! The kick drove Bison headfirst into his bar, shattering the glasses and bottles. Stunned by the dual blows, the general sagged against the wall. Chun-li closed in for the death blow. 20 years of hate and anger pulsed through her. She was a split second away from fulfilling her lifelong murderous dream. Chun-li, don't do it! A voice shouted. Chun-li spun around. Coming through the doorway were Ken, Ryu, Warlord, and Honda. Warlord? Honda! She said with a gasp. What are you doing with those traitors? They betrayed us! No, they're on our side, Warlord said. Lee, listen to him, Honda begged. No! Chun-li spun around to finish the job she started. He has to die for his crimes. Kill him and you kill all the hostages, Ryu said. He's right, Ken added. We need Bison alive. He's the only one who can give the order to release the hostages. For a second, Chun-li was frozen in indecision. That was all the time Bison needed. He rolled away into an alcove and pressed a red button on the wall. Whoosh! A glass panel suddenly dropped from the ceiling, separated Bison from the street fighters. Doors around the room began to click as they locked. Thunk! Chun-li hurtled herself at the glass wall, but she only bounced off. Sssss! Ryu and the others looked up just as yellow gas began pouring out through the vents in the ceiling above. Ha! Muffled by the glass, Bison laughed as the street fighters gasped, staggered, and crumpled to the floor. Chapter 14. With Colonel Gar's stealth boat in the lead, the squadron of AN attack boats swept upriver in a V formation. Cammy and T-Hawk accompanied Garl in his boat, monitoring the weaponry and navigational equipment. Cammy stared at the screen with alarm. "Colonel, aircraft approaching on our 6. "Friendly or enemy?" Guile asked. Before Cammy could answer, the radio crackled on. Colonel Guile, you are ordered to acknowledge." Guile grabbed the mic. "Who is this?" "This is the Undersecretary," the radio replied. "I am above you in the helicopter. This is your last chance to turn around, Colonel Guile. Return to the base at once or face court-martial." Guile rolled his eyes and glanced at T-Hawk. "You believe this guy?" Sir, in roughly 90 seconds that chopper is going to hit Bison's radar perimeter," T-Hawk replied nervously. "As soon as they pick him up, our sneak attack is blown." "Great," Guile groaned and shook his head. "Colonel Guile," the radio cackled again, "I order you to turn around immediately, or so help me, I'll have you shot." Guile could see it again, those idiot bureaucrats and politicians, complete chickens, forcing their way back down as they did in Bosnia. No way, not this time. Guile held the microphone to his lips. "You'll have me shot?" he laughed. "In approximately 1 minute your chopper is going to enter Bison's radar perimeter, and he's going to blow you to bits. And if he misses, I'll finish the job for him." "You're bluffing," the Undersecretary said over the radio. That was it. "T-Hawk, take the controls." Guile handed the boat over to his aide and climbed in back. He grabbed the flare gun from the bulkhead and pushed open the cockpit. The wind whipped around his head as the boat roared upriver, and the helicopter hovered 50 yards above it. Guile aimed the flare as close as he could to the helicopter and fired. The bright orange flare burst out of the gun and shot upwards towards the chopper's windshield. Oops, Guile couldn't help grinning. The flare had gotten a little closer than he wanted. In a flash the chopper veered away. Guile waved and pulled the hatch closed. As he climbed back in the driver's seat, T-Hawk handed over the boat's controls. Meanwhile the Undersecretary's voice blared over the radio again. "Darn you, Guile! You've got no respect for authority. Just wait until I..." Click. Guile turned the radio off. T-Hawk gave Guile a sidelong glance. Excuse me for saying this, sir, but that was our boss." "Hey, you fired me," Guile replied. "He's just lucky I don't work for the post office." Cammy tapped him on the shoulder. "Approaching attack vector Alpha, sir." "Okay." Guile picked up the radio and switched the frequencies. "Attention all boats, stand by at attack vector Alpha. I'll take out the enemy radar. Captain Sawada?" "Yes, sir." Sawada's voice came over the radio. "I'm counting on you." "Don't worry, we'll be there, Colonel," Sawada assured him. "Just promise me you'll save some butts for us to kick." "That's a promise." Guile smiled and turned off the radio. Behind him the entire formation of boats veered off, leaving Guile's boat alone to venture forth up the murky river. Guile and his crew braced themselves for the teeth-jarring vibration that came as he switched the craft into stealth mode. There was a violent lurch, and then the special surface on the boat hummed and glowed. Chameleon-like, it changed colours with the passing landscape. To the human eye it was almost invisible, and, more importantly, to any electronic eyes or ears, it was completely invisible. As they raced upriver with the jungle on both sides, T-Hawk and Cammy exchanged concerned looks. It was a lonely feeling, racing into the jaws of the enemy alone. Guile looked up at the snapshot he'd taped to the dashboard. It showed him with Charlie Blanca and those two crazy French girls, Darcy and Jerry, back in Paris after Bosnia. What a great time they'd had. Friends like Charlie Blanca were rare. "Don't worry, buddy," Guile thought. "I'm coming, and I'm gonna keep coming until I've found you." But the Charlie Blanca Guile knew in Paris no longer existed. Instead, now seated in the brainwashing chamber was a creature as powerful as it was terrifying. Barely recognizable as human, it had enormous muscle mass and lightning reflexes of a cheetah. The DNA mutagens had turned the skin green and his hair orange. His eyes were white, and his canine teeth had grown into fangs. Almost all memory of his life as Carlos Blanca, the soldier, had been erased. It was now being replaced with visual images of destruction and mayhem Bison had ordered Dr. Darlism to brainwash him with. As if to make it even more painful, the very images to be downloaded passed across the screen for the Doctor to witness first. As each moment passed, the thought of what he had done weighed more and more heavily on Dr. Darlism. The idea that his research, all his work, was resulting in the creation of a beast of mass destruction became almost unbearable. Was this the way he wanted to be remembered, as the Dr. Frankenstein of the 20th century? Darlism glanced over at the guard assigned to watch him. The man was engrossed in the girly magazine. With a casual flick of his finger, the Doctor hit the controls on the computer console. The visual images vanished. The words cerebral download halted 49% appeared on screen. Keeping one eye on the guard, Dahlem quickly typed new commands. Commands he had secretly programmed behind Bison's back weeks earlier. Now another set of words appeared on the computer screen. Alternate cerebral programming online. Begin download. What happened next brought tears to Dahlem's eyes. Before him on the monitor passed pictures of great acts of decency, kindness and giving, scenes of people helping each other, nursing each other, building, sacrificing and uniting. Scenes of weddings, happy children, porpoises swimming gracefully in the sea, the faces of Dahlem's heroes, Florence Nightingale, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela and Mother Teresa now floated like angels across the screen. Inside the tank, Blanca at first appeared puzzled by the sudden change. Then slowly, almost painfully, a smile appeared on his lips. Dahlem blinked back the tears and glanced at the computer terminal. The alternate download screen flashed 65%, 70%, 75%. Dahlem held his breath. The mutant beast in the chamber would never be 100% good. He had already been programmed with too much violence and madness, but Dahlem knew that if he could complete the alternate download, the beast would have more good than bad in him, and that could make the difference. "What are you doing there?" The sound of the guard's voice made Dahlem jump. He leaned over the monitor and tried to block the guard's view of the monitor. Nothing," he stammered. Zap! A bolt from the guard's electric prod doubled the scientist over. The guard stared down at the monitor. His eyes went wide. He yanked a walkie-talkie from his belt and started to yell. "Security! This is the Clang! Dahlem crept up behind the man and smacked an empty metal canister down on his head. The guard staggered and the walkie-talkie went flying. Whamp! The guard angrily backhanded Dahlem, sending the scientist backward until he slammed into the wall and crumpled to the ground. The guard stormed over him and grabbed him by the neck, yanking him. "You think you're smart, don't you?" the guard yelled, tightening his grip around Dahlem's neck. "Let's see how smart you are when you're not breathing!" Dahlem struggled with all his strength. The two men twisted and churned in a dance of death, smashing into tables and knocking over beakers and vials. Some of the DNA mutagens splashed on Dahlem. Oddly, Dahlem wondered if he could live long enough for it to affect him, but by then the guard was pushing him against the computer console. His hands were still around the doctor's throat. Dahlem was weakening quickly as the breath and life were choked out of him. He reached out desperately, trying to hit the switches and buttons on the console in one last-ditch effort. Click! He hit the one he needed. Behind them, the doors of the brainwashing chamber hissed open, and a large, thick cloud of vapour poured out. Blanca was free to leave. Dahlem had no idea if he'd done the right thing. If the monster was evil, then there was little left on Earth to stop Bison from using him to conquer the planet. The light began to go dim in Dahlem's eyes. His lungs throbbed painfully and screamed for air. But it was too late. He was fading. "Ah!" There was a sudden blood-curdling scream. Dahlem felt the hands around his neck go limp, but it was too late. The scientist slipped into unconsciousness. Chapter 15. Ryu felt like he was dreaming in slow motion. His thoughts were thick and gooey as cake frosting. His eyes opened, but he couldn't focus. He didn't know where he was. That yellow gas was nasty stuff. All he knew was what he could feel. He was lying on some kind of metal catwalk, his wrists handcuffed to a railing. Others were handcuffed around him. He slowly struggled to his feet, his vision coming back. He and the other street fighters were handcuffed to a rail at the back of Bison's command center. Across the room from them was a huge bank of video screens. Dozens of Bison troopers and technicians milled around. On the floor below, Bison looked up at his prisoners. Vega and Sagat stood beside him. "I told you we can trust them," Vega was saying to Sagat as he glared at Ryu and his companions. Bison had a benign smile of someone who was certain of victory. "Vega, be civil," he said. "They worked so hard to get here. Let them enjoy their ringside seats." The renegade general stepped closer to the street fighters. Ryu watched as Honda, Balrog, Chun-li and Ken came to their senses and stood up unsteadily, blinking as if they were in shock. "You know, it's interesting," Bison called up to them from the floor below. "Had you worked together as a team instead of against each other, you might have been successful. There's a lesson in cooperation here. Too bad you won't live to learn from it." Bison might have continued the lecture, but DJ suddenly called to him on the radar. "General! Something strange on the river. Our radar stations are failing. And in sequence." Bison quickly turned and headed to the radar console. Vega and Sagat followed him. Now Zangief approached the street fighters. "Ryu, Ken," he said indignantly. "General Bison is great man, who wants peace and happiness for whole world. Why you betray him?" Ken stared at him in disbelief. "Come on, Zangief, wake up and smell the coffee." Zangief scowled, as if he didn't understand. "Coffee? Where is coffee?" "No, Mega Brain, that's just a saying," Ken said. Zangief frowned, and then he grinned as if struck by a sudden insight. "Ah, now I understand. It is because I take your women. You are mad with me." Ken glanced at Ryu and rolled his eyes. "How could anyone be that dumb?" he whispered. "Hey," Ryu whispered back. "He believes in Bison, doesn't he?" A siren rang out, and lights began to flash around the command center. A voice coming over the speaker shouted, "Battle stations, Code 1! Meanwhile, Bison was still hunched over the radar console, trying to make sense of a tactical display. Everything said the river was empty, yet the radar perimeter was crashing, beacon by beacon, one by one. Suddenly, Bison brightened. "Of course!" he exclaimed. "A stealth attack boat, coming upriver alone. DJ, activate sonar detectors and filter all inputs." "Yes, sir!" DJ's fingers raced over the computer controls. The Street Fighter's eyes widened as a huge image of Guile's stealth boat appeared on the bank of video screens. "Prepare for attack mode!" Bison shouted. Ryu felt a chill run through him. The approaching boat was their salvation, but he feared they were about to see it destroyed. On the bank of screens, they watched as hatches on either side of the stealth attack boat opened and rotated guns began to fire towards the riverbanks. "What are they doing?" Ken whispered. Ryu shook his head. From the point of view, the guns seemed to be firing aimlessly into the jungle. "No," Chun-li said with a hiss. "Look! Radar!" Now Ryu saw what she was talking about. Set deep in the jungle were large red sweeping radar outposts that served as beacons in Bison's defense system. Suddenly a radar installation vanished in an explosion of red fire. "Whoever's in that boat is trying to knock them out," Borg whispered. At that moment, a second radar installation blew apart. "It's a suicide mission," Ryu said with a gasp, struck with the courage of a person who would single-handedly subject himself, or herself, to every weapon Bison had. "Perimeter guns!" Bison shouted. Rising out of the jungle were massive guns that fired by remote control. Out on the river, the stealth boat weaved in evasive action, but bullets raked in gunwales and ricocheted off the windows. Bison lifted his microphone. "Attention attack boat! This is General Bison. Our defenses are locked on you. Identify yourself." "This is the collection agency, Bison," a voice replied. "Your butt is 6 months overdue, and it's mine." "That's Guile," Chun-li said with a gasp. "What?" Sagat asked, startled. "Guile? Alive?" "It's a trick," Vega yelled. "You wish," Ken yelled from the catwalk. Bison studied Ken and then smiled. "Yes, of course!" Bison turned to Sagat. "His death was designed to ingratiate his spies with you. How else would you take them in? Very clever." The warlord turned back to the screen. "Your faked death was quite convincing, Guile, but this time, Colonel, you die for real." Ryu and the others watched as Bison stepped calmly onto his floating platform and rose into the air in the middle of the control room to get a better view of the screens. "Activate all underwater mines," he shouted. "For my command." On the screen, the image of the boat was replaced by a tactical computer graphics showing the hidden river mines. Each mine was as large as a giant pumpkin and covered in detonation spikes. The screen divided in half. One half showed the position of the mines relative to Guile's boat, the other showed the boat itself, still racing upriver. As the boat neared the first mines, Bison detonated them. On the video screen, huge white geysers of water burst out from the surface as the mines exploded, rocking the boat like a plastic toy in someone's bathtub. Boom, boom, boom! One after another, the mines exploded. The whole scene reminded Ryu of some kind of giant computer game, with Bison controlling the action. As the stealth attack boat raced further and further upstream, the mines were massed more tightly until kaboom! The boat exploded into a fireball, throwing burning debris in every direction for hundreds of yards. Suddenly the entire video bank was nothing but fire. The street fighters watched in stunned silence. His face lit red by the video fire, Bison turned to them and raised a triumphant fist. "Game over!" he cried. The reeds near the edge of the river quietly parted as 3 wet but very much alive commandos crawled up the riverbank. Knowing that Bison had them in a radar lock, Guile, Cammy and T-Hawk had jumped from the stealth attack boat just moments before Bison had blown it up. Now they crept up on shore, in the underbrush, 100 yards from the ancient temple that covered Bison's fortress. T-Hawk wore a battle vest loaded with C4 plastic explosives. Cammy carried a thick coil of rope over her shoulder. Guile crouched in the tall grass and brush, and gazed up at the crumbling pile of stones used as a place of peaceful worship for thousands of years. "What do you think? What 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 do you think? Whoop! What do you think?" Cammy whispered to him. "I would never have guessed Bison would pick a place like this," Guile whispered back. "Sort of ironical," T-Hawk quipped. "Not to a man who thinks he's a god," Guile said. T-Hawk nodded gravely and pointed towards the base of the ruins. "If he's a god, then those must be his angels." Guile looked ahead and saw 3 Bison guards with red helmets and silver face masks. "I can take those 3, he said. "You follow behind me and take care of anyone who might be attracted by the noise." Guile crept up through the brush and trees. The 3 guards stopped to light cigarettes. Guile picked up a coconut and lofted it silently in the air. Thunk! The coconut hit the ground just past the men. Just as Guile hoped, they turned towards the sound, raising their guns. Wham! Pow! Whack! With swift whirling kicks, Guile blindsided the 3 men in quick succession. As expected, the commotion brought several more Bison's men running. As soon as they were all taken care of, Guile led Cammy and T-Hawk to the base of the temple. A large steel door at the entrance was locked shut. "How do we get in?" Cammy asked with a gasp, still breathing hard from the fight. "I'll set some charges, sir," T-Hawk said, pulling several packets of C4 plastic explosive from his battle vest. "We can crack this can in no time." "No," Guile raised his hand to stop him. "We don't want to announce ourselves just yet." "How else are we going to get in?" T-Hawk asked. Guile looked around. "They have to breathe down there. Let's find a ventilation shaft." It wasn't long before they found what they were looking for. A large piece of metal grating covering a hole in the ground. Unfortunately, a rather large black snake had also found it, and was resting on the metal grating. After you, sir," T-Hawk swallowed. Guile knelt down and gently lifted the grate over the ventilation shaft. The snake slithered away through the tall wild grass. T-Hawk peered down. "This isn't a ventilation shaft, it's an old well," he whispered. "Then you can bet the ventilation shaft runs into it somewhere down there," Guile said. "How are we going to find it?" Cammy asked. The 3 of them looked at each other. One of them had to go down. "Okay, Cammy, give me the rope," Guile said. "You 2 set the markers." They lashed one end of the rope to the tree, and then Guile backed quickly into the well and started to rappel down. The rocky walls were slippery and damp. The old tree roots stuck out here and there, and moisture dripped down the walls. As Guile descended deeper into the darkness, the square patch of sunlight above him grew smaller and smaller. "Colonel," Cammy called down after several minutes, "electronic and visual markers have been set." "Good," Guile called back up. "ETA landing zone in 12 minutes, Cammy said. "Roger, Lieutenant. I'll be ready." No sooner were the words out of his mouth than a large tarantula hopped off the system wall onto his shoulder. Guile lost his grip on the rope and slid nearly 20 feet before regaining his control. "I'll be ready," he thought, "if I live." Finally he came to another metal grating in the wall of the well. Just as he'd expected, a modern metal ductwork led away horizontally. Guile kicked off from the wall and swung back on the rope. Clang! He kicked the grating and crawled into the duct. Now he just had to hope it didn't lead straight to Bison's command center. Guile pulled out a gun and a flashlight and crawled on his hands and knees. The air in the duct was oddly cold and damp, making him wonder if it was running from an air-conditioned computer center. A little while later he pushed through another grate and climbed to the floor of the darkened laboratory. Guile stood up and looked around. Lit only by emergency lighting, it appeared that a fight had taken place there recently. A gruesomely mangled body of a Bison guard lay on the floor, his eyes frozen open in terror, the neck broken, the limbs twisted into unnatural positions. The colonel had seen the horrors of combat many times in his life, but he was sure he had never seen anything like this. Only something inhumanely powerful could have done it. Guile stepped forward through the shadows with great caution. Here and there, shorted electrical wires flickered and sizzled. The flashlight beam picked up something large and white. It looked like some sort of underwater chamber with a round window. Inside was a seat with all sorts of electrical gear and dripping IVs. Guile felt a sickening chill. He'd never seen such a thing before. but it looked disturbingly like a torture or brainwashing chamber. He glanced back at the battered body of the guard and wondered if the two things had something in common, and then he sensed something move behind him. Garl quickly spun, but it was too late. The thing grabbed him and lifted him effortlessly off the ground. Wham! Garl felt the hard, unforgiving wall of the concrete smash against his back. The blow nearly knocked him unconscious. For the first time in his life, he knew he was in the grip of something against which he didn't have a chance. Chapter 16. Wham! Grunting and snarling, the thing smashed Garl into the wall again. At first glance, Garl couldn't believe what he was looking at. Its features were only vaguely human. Long orange hair spread back from the thick, pinched features of its face. It was hunched over, with muscle mass like Garl had never seen before. The way it picked him up, he might as well have been a toy soldier. Wham! Again Garl was smashed into the wall, and again he looked down at his attacker. There was something incredibly, bizarrely familiar. Charlie? It didn't seem possible. But Bison had taken Blanca, along with the hostages. The creature was just about to smash Garl into the wall again. Garl doubted if he'd survive another blow. He had only one chance. "Carlos!" he said with a grunt. "Carlos! Is that you?" The creature suddenly hesitated, its face twisted as if a primitive mind inside was at work. Garl didn't know whether to be happy or horrified. Could it really be his friend? "Charlie! It's me! William!" Garl felt the creature's grip on him loosen. He felt himself set down on the ground. Then it was Charlie. Garl felt a sudden surge of rage and horror inside. How had Bison done this to his friend? "William!" The creature struggled with words like a child just learning to speak. "I'm your friend," Garl said. Friend," Blanca repeated. Garl had never felt so devastated in his life. "How?" he whispered, gasping. "What did they do to you?" "To me?" Blanca grunted, as if only now realizing what he was and who he had been. Garl watched in tormented amazement as the huge, powerful creature sank miserably to the floor, holding pathetically onto his friend's leg. "Help me, William," Blanca whispered desperately. "Please, help me." Garl knew what his friend was asking for. He wanted to be put out of his misery. He wanted Garl to kill him. Garl put his hand gently on Blanca's head. "Yes, Carlos, I'll try to help you." It was the hardest thing Garl had ever had to do, but somehow he managed to draw his pistol and cock it. Rage coursed through his veins. He would help his friend, and then he would make Bison pay. He started to aim the pistol down at the creature's head. He hated this. He would make Bison suffer for doing this to his friend. His fingers started to close around the trigger. "Goodbye, my friend." "Stop!" From out of nowhere, a hand closed over the gun. Garl looked up into the face of Dr. Darlism. "You have no right," the scientist said. Garl's jaw clenched tightly. Then, slowly, he turned, aiming the gun at Darlism. "Who are you?" "Darlism. Dr. Darlism." "Tell me something, Dr. Darlism," Garl said. "Did you do this to my friend?" Darlism looked down at Blanca, then back at Garl and nodded. "Yes, I was a part of this nightmare." "Then I have the right," Garl said, squeezing the trigger slowly, "to kill you." To Garl's surprise, the scientist nodded. "Yes, you may. I'm guilty, and I regret what I've done terribly. But let me explain something to you first, so that you understand. Otherwise you'll go through your life wondering how this horrible thing happened." Garl kept the gun aimed at the scientist's forehead. "You better talk quickly, Dr. Darlism. I don't have much time." Darlism explained how he'd been kidnapped by Bison's men in Stockholm and brought here, forced to work for the general. He explained he was a prisoner too, and that it was Bison's scientists who warped Carlos Blanca's body and mind. "I did what I could to keep him human," the scientist insisted. Garl looked down at his friend, still cowering at his feet. "You call this human?" Darlism reached out and tilted Blanca's face up towards them. Garl was shocked to see tears streaming down the creature's large white eyes. "His mind retains the capacity for good," Darlism said. Garl glanced back at the misshapen body of the guard lying on the floor. "Yes, and the capacity for evil too," Darlism allowed. "Would you kill him because he has difficulty understanding the difference? Or because he had the mind of a child? Or because he is misshapen? If those are your criteria for execution, when will the killing stop?" Garl just stared at the horrid creature who had once been his best friend. He had no answers, only anger. Bison would dearly pay for this. High on the wall next to the bank of video screens, the countdown clock struck 000000. A gong rang, followed by a moment of quiet as the implication of what it meant sank in. Bison turned slowly to his electronics whiz. "The time has come," he muttered. "DJ, has the AN put the 20 billion in my Swiss bank?" DJ's fingers sprang over the computer keyboard. Account information flashed onto the screen. Next to the balance was a large glowing 0. DJ winced slightly, and then looked up at his boss. "No, General," he said solemnly. Bison nodded slowly. "Then open the hostage chamber." The massive doors in the middle of the floor parted. The hostages inside squinted at the sunlight with puzzled, fearful expressions on their faces. Bison manoeuvred his floating platform until he hovered over them. "The world thought very little of you, my dear guests," he said, his voice booming. The hostages cowered below. Over on the rail, Ryu bristled with anger at the way Bison purposefully terrorized those poor people. "Yes," the mad general continued scornfully, "the world thought too little to pay the pittance I asked for. Too little to even mount a decent rescue attempt. So, you do not deserve the martial dignity of a firing squad. Your masters at the AN call me a wild beast. So be it. You will be killed by a wild beast. A beast born of my own genius." Bison turned to DJ and shouted, "Raise the chamber!" DJ typed the commands and the hatch in the floor opened. A moment later the white chamber rose from the laboratory on the floor below. 24 razor-sharp knives rose up from the floor to lead the creature to the hostage pit. "Behold," Bison cried, "the face of your destruction and of my victory!" The doors to the chamber parted. A thick cloud of fog and vapour escaped. The hostages backed away from the light. A fiendish, vicious smile creased Bison's lips. On the catwalk at the back of the room, Ryu's knuckles turned white, and he squeezed the rail in fearful anticipation. A figure leaped from the chamber. A blur of power and motion, it cleared the fence of knives and headed straight towards Bison. Whomp! He smashed Bison feet first, slamming the warlord to the floor of the floating chamber. In a flash, he pulled a pistol and jammed it against Bison's head. "It's Guile!" Chun-li cried. Bison's troopers milled around, confused, uncertain what to do. The hostages stepped back into the light. "Yahoo! All right!" The street fighters cheered happily. On the floating platform, Bison stared up at Guile, stunned. "How is this possible?" he asked, gasping. "I destroyed you! I saw it on my TV!" "Maybe you ought to change to cable," Guile replied with a smile, as he pointed at the bank of video screens. Bison looked up. A huge force of AN troops led by Captain Sawada was racing upriver in landing craft. Guile followed Bison's eyes to the other screens, showing his troopers in the fortress going about business as normal. They had not been alerted to the attack. Clearly they had no idea what was heading toward them. Bison turned and locked eyes with DJ, sending a silent message. The electronics whiz instantly swiveled his head and locked eyes with an ominous, bald technician at the control center, who glanced down at a large red lever marked Red Alert. Meanwhile, an incensed Zangief started towards Guile. The colonel cocked his pistol and pressed the barrel against Bison's head. Now, he warned. "I wouldn't try anything rash. Anybody moves, and you're all out of work." Zangief froze, but the bull technician started to inch his way towards the alert lever. Guile caught a glimpse of him in the reflection of Bison's platform, and instantly aimed the gun at the man. "That means you too, Crumpdome," Guile ordered. "One more move, and you're in Shadowloo's unemployment line." The bull technician stopped and raised his hands. Guile yanked Bison to his feet, keeping the gun pressed firmly against his head. He moved towards DJ and gestured to the street fighters handcuffed to the catwalk. "Release those prisoners," Guile ordered. DJ hesitated and looked at Bison uncertainly. "Let me rephrase that," Guile said, aiming his pistol at DJ's feet. Blam! The gun went off, and a bullet ricocheted off the floor near DJ's shoes. In a flash, the electronics whiz dashed up the ladder, digging into his pocket for his keys. Guile noticed that Bison's attention was elsewhere. Turning back to the giant screen, he saw why. The AN Zodiacs were coming ashore near the ruins. Thus far, not a single Bison trooper had spotted them, but in a few moments the AN forces would have Bison's stronghold surrounded. Guile and Bison weren't the only ones watching what was happening outside. So were the troopers in the command center. Some of them tensed and started to raise their rifles. Guile saw that some of them were thinking of firing. He yanked the pistol round so they could see clearly the gun pressed against their leader's head. But the troopers kept their guns raised. They weren't convinced. Guile put his lips close to Bison's ear. "Usually, you never shut up," he said with a growl. "Say something to your troopers that I like." "Don't try to shoot him," Bison shouted. Then, without warning, he added, Shoot the hostages! Chapter 17. Blam, blam, blam. The troopers started firing to the hostage pit. The terrified hostages cowered around the edges of the pit, trying to protect themselves from the fuselage of bullets. DJ had just reached the catwalk, but at the sound of gunshots he quickly spun around to leave. Not so fast! Ryu stuck his foot out to trip him, and the keys went flying. Hanging onto the rail like a ballet dancer, Ken desperately stretched his leg out and bounced the keys off his ankle like a hacky sack. Jingle, jingle! Again and again Ken bounced the keys off his ankle in a superhuman attempt to save him from falling to the floor below. The rest of the Street Fighters watched in silent awe. Jingle, jingle! Ken reached for one last kick, and missed. The keys fell onto the floor below. Ken looked sheepishly into the eyes of the fellow Street Fighters. "Hey," he said with a shrug. "I tried." "Now I'll try," Honda grumbled. "Come on, Balrog." The two powerhouses grabbed the rail and yanked with all their might. Sprung! The rail snapped. "Show off," Ken muttered. Blam, blam, blam. Bison's troopers were still firing at the hostages. Pang, zing, blong! The bullets were hitting the steel walls and ricocheting all over the place. Garl had no choice. He had to protect the hostages. Flinging Bison away, he dove for the hostage pit control panel and smashed it with one powerful kick. The massive steel doors started to close. Once again the hostages were trapped in the dark inside, but at least they were safe. No longer able to shoot at the hostages, Bison's troopers aimed their guns at Guile. Blam, blam, blam! Bullets started to rain down on him. Guile dove behind some rubble left over from the ancient temple. Ping, zing! The bullets ricocheted around him. The air was heavy with the smell of burned gunpowder. Blam, blam! Guile fired back. Then he saw a bald tech move towards the red alert lever. Guile quickly aimed his pistol. Click, click! The gun was empty. The technician was just about to reach out for the lever. Once he did, an AN surprise attack would no longer be a surprise. Guile quickly reached into his belt and pulled out a knife. Swish! He held it through the air. Plat! The knife hit the tech in the back. The man's eyes rolled up into his head. Thunk! He fell forward, landing on the lever anyway. Bring! Loud bells and sirens instantly began to wail, alerting Bison's troopers everywhere of the attack. Red and yellow lights began to flash. Guile looked at the surveillance monitors and felt his face fall. The troopers everywhere in the fortress heard the alarm and were instantly mobilizing. Meanwhile, seeing that Guile's gun was empty and he'd thrown his knife, Bison's troopers in the command center charged at the colonel. Guile had nothing left to fight with except his body. It was going to be tough going against several dozen highly trained, heavily armed troopers. Whomp, wham, bam! He quickly leveled the first three with vicious low kicks, but the wave of troopers were unstoppable. Suddenly he was surrounded. It looked bad. Then Ryu dropped down from the catwalk. Ken followed, along with Chun-li, Honda and Balrog. Thunk! Ryu wiped out a trooper with a heavy neck chop. Crack! Ken's fist imploded into another trooper's ribcage. "Nice of you guys to drop in," Gar said with a grin, as he smashed a trooper over the head. "We were wondering what happened to you," Ryu said. "Yeah, glad you made it," said Ken, banging two troopers' heads together. "Always happy to join a party," Gar replied, as he fought yet another trooper. Listen, Colonel," Ryu said as he stomped several more of Bison's men. "You wouldn't happen to have our passports handy, would you?" "Tell you what," Gar said as he swung a trooper by his arm, threw him into three others. "You get the hostages free, and not only will you get your passports, but I'll personally buy you a first-class ticket home." "Love to oblige, Colonel," Ryu said, "but it looks to me like you've pretty much knocked out the controls for the hostage pit doors." "You'll have to get down to the lower level," Gar said as he kept fighting. "There should be another set of controls down there." Ryu and Ken nodded at each other and grinned. "Maybe they serve caviar and champagne in first class," Ken said. "Don't bet on it," Ryu winked, and the two Street Fighters headed towards the lower level. Across the room, Victor Sagat saw Ryu and Ken leave. His blood boiled. He had trusted those two. They had betrayed him. The army attacking outside might bring Bison down, but first Sagat would have his revenge. The head of the Shadaloo Tong pulled Vega away from the crowd and led him away towards the lower level, following Ryu and Ken. Meanwhile, Gar fought with one eye on the surveillance monitors on the wall. He saw now that Bison's troopers were pouring out of the fortress, engaging the Aeon troopers in hand-to-hand combat outside the temple walls. Another Street Fighter dropped down beside Guile and began to fight. It was Chun-li. She and Guile fought back-to-back, kicking trooper after trooper into next week. "Colonel Guile, good to see you again," Chun-li said with a smile as she fought. "I don't know, Chun-li," Guile replied. "You show up in the most unlikely places." "You could thank me for helping you," Chun-li said, only half kidding. "You really want to help?" Guile asked. "Go down to the lower level with Ryu and Ken, and get those hostages out of here, and to safety." "Sorry," Chun-li shook her head. "I have something else in mind." "Yeah, I know," Guile said. "You want to kill Bison yourself." Their conversation was interrupted by a new onslaught of Bison's troopers. Chun-li and Guile beat them back with their hands, feet, and everything else they could use. A few moments later, they were standing back to back again, engaged in regular hand-to-hand combat with the enemy. "You don't understand, Colonel," Chun-li tried to explain. "Bison killed my father." "There are 63 mothers and fathers locked below us right now," Guile replied. "You can go on chasing your revenge. Maybe you'll get it. But meanwhile, the world will get a whole new crop of orphans. Is that what you want?" Chun-li had to admit it wasn't. "Then go do what I said," Guile said. "You know, for a soldier, you make a lot of sense," Chun-li said. "I'll take that as a compliment," Guile replied. "And I'll go see what I can do," said Chun-li. "Good." Guile paused to roundhouse a trooper in the head, knocking him back into 4 others. Chun-li started away and then hesitated and looked back at Guile. "Colonel," she began. "Don't say be careful," Guile said. Chun-li smiled. "When you find Bison, make him suffer." "Count on it," Guile answered. Chapter 18. The fighting outside the temple was at a standoff. The problem was the heavily fortified entrance to the fortress. As the fighting raged, Cammy walked calmly through the battle, looking for a way in. She found it in the form of an American-made bazooka dropped by one of Bison's men. The man had been considerate enough to leave behind a shell as well. With the troopers grappling and bodies flying around her, Cammy loaded the shell and aimed it at the fortress door. Kaboom! She fired the bazooka, blowing the doors right off their hinges. "Sweet!" Cammy struck her fingers with her mouth and whistled. In the midst of the fighting, T-Hawk turned towards the sound and saw Cammy pointing at the gaping opening where the door had once been. "How'd you do that?" T-Hawk yelled. "Borrowed something," Cammy yelled back, holding up the bazooka. "Care to go in?" T-Hawk grinned. "Sounds good." He turned and waved a squad of AN commandos. "Gentlemen, if you'll come this way..." DJ didn't like bullets. No way. It wasn't in his contract and it wasn't part of his job. He should have been getting combat pay for this. Ducking around the computer console, he struggled to get some controls back online. At this point, he wasn't doing it for General Nutcase, he was doing it for himself. He had to slow down these AN commandos so he could get his act together and blow this joint. Suddenly a figure dropped down beside him. Oh no, it was the big bad wolf himself. "DJ!" Bison cried. "Where is Blanca? Where is my genetic warrior?" If that Blanca dude had any brains left, he was probably out taking a swim down the Shadloo River, but DJ couldn't say that. Instead, he acted real panicked. "I don't know," he shouted. "Everything's crashing." "Find him," Bison yelled. "Check the security surveillance system." DJ hit the controls. The audio came up before the video. Screams of panic, gunfire, and groans of pain. Now the visual flickered on. Bison troopers were running this way and that in confused terror. "What's wrong with them?" Bison asked, gasping. DJ peered more closely at the screen. Down at the end of the corridor, a shadowy, bestial figure was flinging men around like dolls. "I have a feeling they met someone they didn't like," he said, pointing at the screen. Bison peered down. "It's Blanca! He's fighting my men!" the warlord said with a gasp. "How could he?" "Man, I think he fights whoever he meets," DJ said. "I knew a guy like that once." "No," Bison said. "It's Dallism. The cerebral programming. DJ, patch it in here at once." The electronics whiz was peeved. This was definitely overtime. But DJ had a feeling that this was the wrong time to bring it up. Once again he tapped the keys, pulling up the most recent programming Dallism had run through the brainwashing virtual reality chamber. Images of peace, love and humanity played across the video screen. "No!" Bison screamed. Smash! In a livid fury, he smashed his fist in the computer screen. DJ ducked as pieces of computer went flying. Oddly, Bison grew calm after that. He gazed up at the surveillance screens and saw the AN commandos swarming through the corridors of the fortress. "Then defeat is a possibility," he said solemnly. "Very well. We shall face it together, DJ, with the stoicism of true warriors." Bison's eyes were riveted on the action unfolding on the screens above. Meanwhile, DJ quietly backed away. There was no defeat clause written into his contract either. Maybe Bison wanted to go down with this ship, but it was time for DJ to blow this joint and start typing up a new resume. "DJ?" Bison looked around, puzzled, when he realised his electronics whiz was no longer there. DJ wasn't the only one making plans to take leave of this madness. Down on the lower level, Ken and Ryu fought their way through squads of Bison troopers. But as Ryu turned to search for a way to release the hostages, Ken turned towards an exit. "What are you doing?" Ryu asked with a brief moment of calm. "Splitting," Ken replied. "Why?" Ken couldn't believe how naive his partner could be. "Hey, listen, Ryu. Consider the facts. The Guile put a gun to our head and forced us into this mess. I think we've been good little soldiers. But now the debt's been paid, okay? Now the real soldiers are here, and I'm gone. What's wrong with you? Ryo asked. Wrong? Ken frowned. Yeah, there were people fighting upstairs, Ryo said. People are dying there, man. We're not walking away. Right, Ken said. They're getting paid to fight, get it? Remember how it was on the streets? No pay, no play. And we're not getting paid. Yeah, we are, Ryo said. In what? Ken asked sourly. Gratitude dollars? Ryo put his hands on his hips and shook his head sadly. It seemed as if his buddy would never understand. Hey, look, Mr. Holier-than-thou, Ken said. You coming or not? Maybe if we go now we can find something worthwhile in this place before it blows sky high. I already found something worthwhile, Ryo replied. Ken scowled. Like what? You wouldn't understand, Ryo said. The two street fighters stared at each other silently for a moment, but Ryo couldn't waste any more time. There were hostages who need to be saved. See you around. He gave Ken a chilly wave and turned away. Guile was still fighting Bison's troopers hand to hand. It was an exhausting exercise, but suddenly he realized 3 more had snuck up behind him. He wondered if he had the endurance to go the distance with them. Rumble! Just then a stone wall beside the troopers toppled and scattered them. As the dust cleared, Guile looked up in surprise. It was Honda, dressed like a sumo and ready to fight. Across the room, Zangief let out a roar, and the two titans charged at each other. Whomp! In the middle of the command center, they collided like freight trains meeting head-on. Whoops! As they wrestled over the floor hatch leading down to the lab, the hatch gave way under their weight. Guile watched in amazement as the two giants disappeared from sight. Something tapped him on the arm. Guile spun around, raising his hands to fight, but it was only Cammy. Sorry to startle you, sir, she said, saluting formally. It's okay, Guile relaxed. At ease, Lieutenant. Progress report? Ground level and this floor are secure, sir, Cammy reported. Sawada's team is working their way deeper into the complex. And Bison? Guile asked. No sign of him, sir. Guile smirked. He shook his head wearily. He's probably hiding. Hiding! A voice boomed over the room. Everyone looked up. A huge live image of Bison, as pompous as ever, filled every one of the video screens. What do I have to fear from you? Bison asked haughtily. You are mere worker ants, scurrying about with your pitiful weapons, afraid of the purity of unarmed combat. Come out from behind the curtain, wizard, Guile shouted back. We'll see how pure your combat really is. Guile started to pull off his battle vest and undo his gun belt. No, sir, T-Hawk said, gasping. Don't you see that's exactly what he wants you to do? Bison stepped out from behind the video screens, the real man dwarfed by the video image towering over him. No, Hawk, Guile stripped down to his sleeveless blue military t-shirt. This is what we both want. Am I right, Bison? Are you man enough to fight with me? Anyone who opposes me will be destroyed, Bison announced confidently. The two men approached each other in the middle of the command center floor. Colonel, Cammy said with a gasp, you can't! Yes, I can. Guile looked back at her. You just get out of here. If I'm not topside in 15 minutes, evacuate without me. Neither Cammy nor T-Hawk moved. That's an order, Guile shouted. Cammy and T-Hawk glanced at each other and then slowly left the room. Chapter 19. The dust and flying debris made it hard for Chun-li and Balrog to find their way through the lower level. Bison troopers seemed to come from all directions, only to be met by Chun-li's devastating kicks and Balrog's monstrous punches. But just how to free the hostages remained a mystery. What happened to Honda? Balrog asked as they fought side by side. I don't know, Chun-li said. He was with us, and then I turned around and he was gone. Boy, I wish I knew where he was, Balrog said. Crash! No sooner had the words left Balrog's lips than Honda and Zangief crashed to the floor in front of them. The two giants rose from the debris with dust and shards falling off their bodies. They instantly went into a clench that would have crushed the bones of any other men. My strength is much greater than yours, Zangief said, grunting. It is natural for a sumo wrestler to be the world's strongest, Honda replied, also with a grunt. Still grappling, they rolled away down the corridor like a giant wrecking ball of muscular protoplasm. Balrog and Chun-li turned to each other in shock. Was it my imagination, or were they both smiling? Chun-li asked. You won't imagine it, Balrog replied. Maybe they're both happy to meet someone who can give them a challenge. They heard footsteps and spun around as 3 heavily armed Bison troopers ran towards them from another corridor. Ya-chi! Chun-li leaped in the air and delivered a teeth-crushing front kick to one of them. Whomp, whomp. Warlord caught the other two with sledgehammer uppercuts to their chins. Chun-li grabbed the trooper she'd just kicked and slammed him against the wall. "The hostages!" she screamed. "Where are they?" The terrified man pointed down the corridor with a trembling finger. Wonk! Chun-li gave him a headbutt and knocked him cold. Then she and Warlord raced down the hall. One thing about nuts like Bison, Ken thought as he moved quietly through the underground rooms. They tend to be rich nuts. Up ahead, through an open doorway, he heard the sound of tumblers falling as someone opened a safe. Ken froze and listened. He heard clicks and clacks, and then the soft, scraping sound of a strongbox being pulled from a wall safe. They were sounds Ken knew well. He sprang forward, determined to find the person before he or she got away, but as he entered the small room, he realized the person was gone. The door to the safe was open. Clearly whatever had been inside had now vanished. Ken shook his head in disgust. It seemed like you couldn't trust anyone these days. And then he noticed a gold statue standing by. Whoa, wouldn't it be great if it was solid gold? Ken smiled to himself, knowing it couldn't be. No one but a nut would leave a solid gold statue that large just sitting around. Just for the hell of it, Ken decided to pick it up. His eyes bulged in surprise. The thing weighed a ton. Could it really be? Was Bison that crazy? It appeared that he was. Ken hefted the statue up into his arms. Looked like it was his lucky day after all. All he had to do was get this thing out of the country and he was set for life. But to get out of this country, he first had to get out of Bison's fortress. Ken looked around and spotted a communication console. Okay, he said to himself. This ought to help me find the front door. He started typing keys, but all that came up was screen after screen of fighting everywhere. Ken kept skipping to different screens. He almost passed one that showed someone in a white karate outfit. Whoa. Ken froze. That was Ryu. He looked more closely. The video camera was positioned to watch a point where two converging corridors intersected. Ryu was coming down one corridor. Sagat and Vega were coming down the other. In a second, Ryu was going to come face to face with them. And that was a face to face he wasn't likely to survive. A microphone jutted out from the console. Ken bent down and spoke into it. "Hey, Ryu, this one's for old time's sake. You're walking into a trap, amigo." But on screen, Ryu kept walking. He gave no indication he'd heard. Ken tapped the mic, then checked the jack. "Ryu," he called again. "You clock me?" Nothing. The audio wasn't getting through. Ken stared at the screen. Every step brought Ryu closer to an extremely unpleasant meeting with Vega and Sagat. Bison and Garl faced off alone in the command room. Bison had a crazy smile on his face. "What are you smiling at?" Garl asked. "You, of course. You've made me a very happy man." "I'm glad," Garl shot back, "because now I'm gonna make you a very dead one." Garl launched himself into the air. Whomp! He hit Bison square in the chest with both feet. The warlord flew backwards. Crash! Bison smashed into the computer panel. Sparks and flames jumped around him. As Garl stepped closer, Bison pushed himself off the panel and whirled into the air, kicking high. Garl ducked. Clank! Bison's armor boot bashed into the bulkhead, denting it. Wham! Garl jumped and delivered a driving kick to Bison's chest. Ugh! The warlord grunted and staggered backwards a few feet, then regained his balance and smiled. "You'll have to do better than that, Garl." "Okay." Garl did a backflip and caught the warlord on the chin. Whack! His kick practically took Bison's head off. The warlord staggered backwards, stunned. Crunk! Garl smashed him in the face with his fist. "That's for what you did to Carlos." Thwonk! He hit him again. "That's for what you did to his 2 soldiers." Bison was seeing stars. It was a miracle he was even standing. Garl moved in with his fists clenched, and a cold smile on his lips. "Just think, Bison, 63 more to go." Kapow! With one last humongous crushing blow, Garl sent Bison flying backwards into his floating platform. Bzzz! Bison smashed into the controls, sending sparks in all directions. A great blue web of electricity embraced him, and the warlord twitched and jerked spasmodically as he was electrocuted. Garl held his breath and watched. He was taking no chances. Finally, the sparks and crackling bolts of electricity faded. Bison slumped backwards on the controls, reached out and pressed 2 buttons against the warlord's neck. There was no pulse. The bastard was dead. Chapter 20. A wave of relief and fatigue swept through him. Garl reached into his pocket and brought out a small walkie-talkie. "This is Garl. Cammy, D-Hook, anyone there?" A female voice with a British accent crackled back. "Colonel, Cammy here. Are you all right?" "I'm okay," Gala said. "Just half dead." "And Bison?" Cammy asked. "All dead," Gala said. "What's the situation?" Unseen behind Guile, Bison's sophisticated body armor began to throb as it automatically administered CPR. "We've encountered fighting in every corridor, sir," Cammy reported via walkie-talkie. "Resistance is high. It's very slow going." Bison's body jerked as his armor administered life-restoring jolts to his heart. "And the hostages?" Guile asked. "We haven't found them yet, sir, but they continue to be our #1 priority." "I've got some volunteers working on it too," Guile said. "Maybe—" He noticed something out of the corner of his eye and spun around. "Sir?" Cammy's voice came over the walkie-talkie. "Sir, are you still there?" Guile couldn't believe what he was seeing. Bison stood before him, as alive as ever, his eyes gleaming with evil. The warlord slowly raised his arms. "Colonel!" Cammy called. Guile braced himself. Something bad was coming. Bzzzt! Bolts of blue lightning surged out of the metallic gloves covering Bison's clenched fists. Ozone crackled in the air. Whomp! Guile was knocked off his feet and backwards to the floor. Shaking the confusion out of his head, he watched as Bison stepped triumphantly towards him. "A weapon, Bison?" Guile asked scornfully. "What happened to the purity of unarmed combat?" Bison stopped and raised his gloves. An electric hum filled the air. "Weapon?" Bison repeated. "Hardly. This is merely superconductor electromagnetism. Surely you've heard of it. It levitates bullet trains from Tokyo to Osaka." Bison pointed at his floating platform. "It levitates my desk, where I ride the saddle of the world. And it levitates me." The hum grew louder, and the soles of Bison's metal boots began to glow. As Guile watched astonished, the warlord rose off the floor and shot towards him. Whomp! Bison delivered a blow that sent Guile reeling backwards into the wall. The warlord followed, floating above like an angel of death. "Something wrong, Colonel," Bison shouted with mad glee. "Let me guess, you came here prepared to fight a madman, and instead you found a god." Bison blasted towards him, preparing to deliver another devastating blow. His cape flapped behind him like Superman's. This time Guile could only wait for the impact and wonder if he'd finally fought his last fight. After finding Ryo alone in the corridor, Vega had begged Sagat to let him take on the street fighter alone. Sagat had granted his wish. They fought through the barracks locker room, with walls lined with red lockers. "Let's pick up where we left off," Vega cried, forcing Ryo into a locker. "Now, where were we?" "You were losing," Ryo replied. Slash! Vega ripped the fearsome claw around, whipping through Ryo's shirt and leaving thin trails of blood across his chest. "I think you must be mistaken," Vega said. "We'll see about that," Ryo spit back. Vega came in with another slashing movement. This time Ryo ducked, spun, and slammed him in the ribs with an elbow. "Ah!" Vega doubled over in pain. "Yeah!" Ryo smiled. "I thought I was right." Wham! A sharp, piercing pain radiated from the small of Ryo's back. He turned and saw that Sagat had come up behind him and delivered a blow to his kidney. "I thought you were going to let Vega fight me alone," Ryo said in surprise. "Only as long as it looked like he was winning," Sagat replied with an evil smile. Rip! Ryo felt a searing pain rake across his shoulder. Vega had slashed him from behind. Ryo quickly backflipped, but found himself in a corner. Vega and Sagat were closing in for the kill. Crack! Sagat suddenly went flying sideways and smashed into the wall of lockers. Ryo looked up, amazed to find that Ken had delivered the blow. "Ken! What made you come back?" I guess I met a dragon," his friend replied with a smile. "Huh?" Ryo was too distracted by the fight to understand. "It's Chi," Ken explained. "Like Guile said." "Good timing," Ryo said, gesturing to Vega and Sagat. "Yeah." Ken looked at Ryo's torn karate suit, and then at his own. "Hey, there's just one thing. I want to make sure there's no mistake about whose side we're on." He reached to his chest and ripped the Bison insignia from his suit. "Good idea." Ken ripped off his as well. "So which one do you want?" Ken asked, pointing at Vega and Sagat. "Well, I started with Crabclaw here, so I think I better finish with him," Ryo said. "Okay, I'll take the one-eyed Jack," Ken said. He squared off against Sagat, and they traded blows. Suddenly the Tong leader slipped and fell. Ken saw an opportunity to finish him off, but didn't take the advantage of it. "Can't finish the job?" Sagat asked, glaring up at him from the floor. "Get up," Ken said. "It's too early for you to be defeated." "You will regret giving me the opportunity," Sagat said, rising to his feet. "I doubt it," Ken said, getting into battle stance. "Oh, yes," Sagat said, circling him menacingly. "You've just shown me what you are." "And what's that?" Ken asked with his fist raised. "You're not a winner," Sagat said with a nasty grin. "You're a beginner." The Tong leader faked and bobbed. Ken threw a punch that went too high. Wham! Bam! Sagat delivered a stinging combination, driving Ken to his knees. Scrack! Vega's stainless steel claw raked the stone just over Ryu's head, leaving a trail of sparks. "Spanish ninja? Try vanish ninja!" Ryu shouted, throwing a whirling kick to the side of his opponent's head. Sprung! Ryu's foot caught Vega in the temple, and his mask went flying. Furious, Vega charged at him with his claw held high. "Handsome fighters never lose!" he screamed. Snatching the mask from the floor, Ryu used it to block the swiping claw. Clank! Vega's claw caught in the mask's eye hole. With an Aikido move, Ryu twisted both the mask and the claw away. "Ah!" Vega let out a yelp as his wrist twisted around painfully. "You've been pretty too long," Ryu shouted. Crunk! Ryu smashed Vega square in the face and felt the bones of the cage fighter's nose crumble. Vega slammed backwards into a locker. He pressed his hand to his nose and stared down incredulously at the bright red blood. No one had ever drawn blood on him before. Wham! Ryu hit him like a pile driver, catching him off guard. Vega crumpled onto the floor. He twitched once and lay unmoving. Oof! Ack! Ugh! Sagat went flying as Ken delivered a merciless series of combinations. Sagat landed on the floor with his back against the lockers, breathlessly wiping blood away from his lips. Ken pointed a finger at him. "Sagat, I owe you. If I hadn't met you, I might have become you." Sagat sat up, feeling his jaw. He knew he'd been defeated in hand-to-hand combat. This was a first. It had never happened before, and it would never happen again. He reached for an assault rifle left behind by a fleeing Bison trooper. "Ken, look out!" Ryu shouted. Ken spun around, but it was too late. Sagat had the rifle in his hands. Ryu leaped in the air. Sagat aimed the rifle and started to squeeze the trigger. Ryu was already sailing towards him, but the distance was too great. "Shoryuken!" Ryu screamed the name of the mystical dragon punch. Pow! Ryu's fist smashed into Sagat's chest. Bang! The assault rifle exploded in a flash of light in the Tong leader's hands. Ryu rolled to his feet, ready to continue the fight, but Sagat remained on the floor, his shirt smouldering and blood seeping through a long, searing rip. Ken walked over and stared down at Sagat, giving him a hard, cold look. "You were right, Sagat," he muttered. "Any coward can pick up a gun." Chapter 21. All hell had broken loose in the command center. Computer consoles were blowing up left and right, showering everything in a cascade of showering sparks. Electric cables were popping like firecrackers. Warning lights flashed on and off. Half a dozen computer-generated voices joined in a chorus of warnings. Superconductor repressors damaged. Energy fields unstable. Reduce power consumption at once. Neither Gal nor Bison paid attention. They were consumed in the ultimate battle, the battle that would end all battles and pave the way for the future. Crash! Gal ducked as the heavy electronics console flew over his head and smashed into the back of computers. He'd hit Bison with everything he had, and nothing had fazed the madman. Now Gal was on the defensive, bleeding, exhausted, every inch of his body aching. He was stalling, buying time until Kami hopefully found the hostages and led them to safety. Blam! Another bolt of electricity knocked him backwards, sending him sliding across the floor. "Give up!" Bison shouted. "Never," Gal muttered, rising unsteadily to his feet. "Surely you see now that you can't win," Bison roared, floating above him with his arms crossed in smug satisfaction. "What keeps you going, Guile? What is it you hope to prove?" he sneered. "That right can defeat might?" The answer was the lives of the hostages, but Gal didn't say it. He had to keep the madman distracted as long as possible. "No," Gal replied. "Just that a hard case can defeat a nutcase." The insult worked. The dictator turned. "Now!" Gal leaped in the air, kicking upwards, but Bison rose a few feet more and Gal missed. Thunk! Gal fell back to the floor and crashed in an exhausted heap. "Ha ha 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 ha!" The control room shook with Bison's demonic laughter. "You still refuse to accept my godhood," the warlord's voice echoed off the walls. "Very well. Keep your own god. In fact, this might be a good time to pray to him. Might I suggest an appropriate passage?" Bison rose up in the room, a dark silhouette against the massive bank of video screens behind him. He held out his arms, spreading his cape like a huge evil spectre. On the floor below, Garl crept backward. "Try Luke, chapter 10, verse 18, Bison's voice boomed. "For I beheld Satan as he fell from heaven like lightning." Bison brought his fists together and began to descend, preparing to end Garl's life with one last massive electrical bolt. Garl lurked, backing up against the wall across from the bank of video screens. Down came Bison through the air, his eyes gleaming, his face contorted in an insane maniacal grin. Closer and closer. Garl inched back, his shoulders pressing hard against the wall. He had one shot left. His life depended on it. The lives of all the hostages and of the thousands of Shadaloo villagers all depended on it. Bison pressed his armoured fist down towards Garl's face. Blue electrical waves pulsed through the clenched fingers. Garl reared back and kicked out with both feet. Wham! The kick caught Bison totally off guard. Still floating in the air, he had no way of halting his sudden backward flight. Right into the bank of video screens. Crash! Bison sailed backwards into the screens, imploding them. The huge video bank lit up like a massive wall of fireworks, glowing and smoking and spraying showers of sparks and glass in all directions. And at its glowing centre, the mighty Bison hung like a moth in a bug zapper, and then disappeared. "Bison," Garl breathed, "you're off the air." No wall was strong enough to hold the battle between Honda and Zangief. The two giants created pathways of their own through the underground fortress as they smashed each other through steel and stone. Without opening doors, they rolled through room after room like a huge living wrecking ball. Stumbling into the room where Bison's cherished model of Bisonopolis stood, they slugged their way through it, like Godzilla and Ghidorah, flattening mountains and squashing buildings. Suddenly they found themselves outside the hostage chamber. Nearby, Cammy had taken out a set of tools and started to hotwire the keypad to the chamber door, while T-Hawk fought off more of Bison's troopers. Just then, Balrog and Chun-Li turned round the corner and sized up the situation. "Is this the hostage chamber?" Chun-Li shouted. "Yes," Cammy replied. "I'm in the process of opening it. This'll only take a minute." Smash! Balrog stepped up next to her and drove his fist right through the keypad. "Actually, maybe less than a minute," Cammy said. The door slid open. Frightened, wary hostages looked out at the street fighters. "Come on!" Cammy waved at them. "We're getting you out of here!" The hostages started out. The street fighters helped them find their way through the maze of corridors. As they filed past Honda and Zangief, a great sumo paused from his fighting. "Sorry," Honda waved at Zangief and started after the hostages. "I can't play with you anymore." "Coward!" Zangief shouted, shaking a fist at him. "Come back!" But Honda disappeared down a corridor. Uncertain what to do, Zangief looked around and noticed that DJ was skulking through the shadows, carrying some sort of wooden box. "DJ!" Zangief cried anxiously. "Where are you going? The enemies of peace and freedom are at the walls!" DJ narrowed his eyes in disbelief. "Are you still buying that garbage? When are you gonna wake up and smell the napalm, Zangief? Our boss is the enemy of peace and freedom. These people came from all over the world to stop him." Deep furrows appeared in Zangief's brow. "General Bison is bad guy? If you know this, then why you serve him?" "Because he paid me a fortune, you moron!" DJ turned and disappeared down a tunnel, leaving Zangief alone in the wreckage. "You got paid?" he asked in astonishment. Chapter 22. Warning lights continued to flash, sirens wailed, and bells rang. A din of computer voices warned of a dozen different system failures and the imminent self-destruction of the fortress itself. He should have gotten out of there, but Garl had to make one last stop. His head throbbing, his bones aching, he limped into the lab, or what was left of it. The place looked like a bomb had gone off. He'd heard so many explosions in the past hour, maybe one of them actually had. "Charlie!" He made his way through the smoky dark, stepping around the rubble, calling for his friend. "Charlie!" A huge figure hulked in the shadows. Garl headed towards it. "Charlie!" he cried. The sight of his friend's mutated form sent shivers through Garl. "Go!" "You're right," Garl said. "We have to go now. This whole place is gonna blow." "No, not me. I cannot go out," Blanca muttered in a voice that was half human, half beast. "I cannot go back." "You can," Garl urged him. "We'll get you help." Not like this," Blanca grumbled. "Charlie," Garl began. "Leave him," a voice said. Garl looked into the eyes of Dr. Darlism. "Don't worry," the doctor said reassuringly. "He won't be alone." "You'll both die if you stay," Gal said. Perhaps, Darlism said sadly, but I must atone for my part in this evil. He reached out lovingly? He reached out lovingly towards Blanca, who cowered at his feet and held his hand like a child. You said he did nothing, Gal said. If good men do nothing, that is evil enough, replied the doctor. Go now and leave. Live and do something. The blare of bells and sirens continued around them, but Gar suddenly realized that the computer voices had all blended together into one single warning. 10 seconds until superconductor meltdown. Sealing blast doors now. Everyone heard it. In a small side tunnel, DJ pressed a hidden button in the wall. In a small side tunnel, DJ pressed a hidden button in the wall. A wall of rocks parted, and a secret passageway out was revealed. Clutching the strongbox under his arm, he smiled to himself and said, Jamaica, here I come. I was thinking of Brazil, a voice said behind him. DJ spun around and came face to face with Sagat. The Tong leader grabbed one end of the strongbox. You just acquired a partner, Sagat informed him. Well, we better run, DJ said, or you'll soon see an underworld even you won't like. 9 seconds to meltdown, the computer voices warned. 8 seconds. Half of the hostages had made it through the blast door. When the door started to drop, the street fighters rushed to hold it up, but the huge steel door weighed many tons. They struggled to stop it, but their combined strength wasn't enough. 7 seconds. Honda! Chun-li shouted as the sumo came lumbering down the hall. Hurry! Here! Honda hurried under the blast door and added his awesome strength, but even that wasn't enough. The door continued to drop. Soon it would crush anyone who tried to stop it. 6 seconds. Zangief appeared and stared at him. Chun-li gave him a pleading look, but it wasn't until Zangief saw Ken and Ryu that he decided to help. Now he had joined the others holding up the door. It was enough. The door stayed up. The hostages got through. 5 seconds. As soon as the hostages were out, the street fighters dove for safety. Whoomph! The blast door slammed down behind them, sealing off the interior of the fortress. 4 seconds. Now they were outside. Ken and Ryu gave Zangief a curious look. Why did you help us? Ken asked. I took your women's, Zangief explained. I could not take your lives as well. 3 seconds. Is everyone out? T-Hawk asked. Cammy looked round, and an awful thought came to her. Guile! She cried. 2 seconds. The ground began to shake. The ancient temple began to collapse in on itself. Cammy and the others stared at the massive blast door, hoping for a miracle. 1 second. Duck, everyone! Borog shouted. Kaboom! Chapter 23. A huge explosion shook the earth. Smoke and debris filled the air. Out of the corners of her eyes, Cammy saw the blast door blown right off its hinges. Thick, black, billowing smoke rushed around behind where the door had been. Then everyone became quiet. The shaken street fighters slowly rose to their feet and stared at the destroyed ruins. The entire temple had crashed down into itself. Only the doorway where the blast doors had been remained standing. T-Hawk sighed sadly. There's no way anyone could have survived that. Cammy felt her tears start to fall. Boro put a protective arm around Chun-li, whose shoulders shook with sorrow. Honda stared sadly at the ground. Ken glanced at Ryu and slowly shook his head. He was a good man, Ken said. The best, said Ryu. There will never be another like him, Cammy said with a sniff. Damn straight, a voice said. Everyone spun around. Just then Garl walked through the smoke out of the passageway. Lieutenant, make a note, he said, stopping beside the utterly shocked Cammy and looking over the group. Give myself a 3-day pass. Yes, sir, Cammy grinned from ear to ear and quickly wiped the tears from her eyes. Everyone safe? Guile asked. Everyone, sir, T-Hawk reported with a wide grin. All the hostages have been accounted for. Good work, Sergeant. Guile stepped over to Ken and Ryu. Well, I guess you've earned your passports back. Ken and Ryu glanced at each other. Then Ryu turned back to Guile. You can hold on to them, sir. Guile looked surprised. We saw a lot of things, Ryu started to explain. We even learned a few things. Besides, Ken added, someone's going to have to put this country back together again. Maybe a couple of hustlers can help. Ever think of re-enlisting? Guile asked. No, they both answered emphatically. Guile smiled and turned to the others. You did a good job, and I'm proud of you. Thanks to your efforts, this country, and maybe even the world, has been saved. He turned away. Now Chun-li came up. Excuse me, Colonel. How about that interview for my network? Sure. Val glanced down at her. But only if you wear that dress. The other street fighters laughed. Even Cammy had to smile. Chun-li held out her hand, and Gal shook it. Not far away, DJ and Sagat staggered out of the secret tunnel into the sunlight. Sagat instantly yanked the box from DJ's hands and threw it down to the riverbank. Hey, I thought we were partners, DJ said. Whatever gave you that impression? Sagat said with a snarl, kneeling down next to the box. Crack! He smashed it open with a neat chop of his hand and stared in. He blinked, then laughed and stood up. On second thought, he said with a chuckle, it's all yours. DJ watched the man walk off into the jungle. Boy, it sure looked like he'd shorted a few fuses, but all the better for him. The electronics whiz kneeled down and lifted out a thick handful of dollars. Bison dollars. Wow, wow, wow. The end.